I'm going to call this meeting to order. Please, and again, for the record, Ann, can you show that all 7 commissioners are here? We've already done the Pledge of Allegiance. And just a couple things on the agenda. Just for anybody in the audience that hasn't been at the last couple of meetings, we have changed our citizen comment section of the meetings. It's no longer in the front of the agenda. If I can just read this again. Citizen comment regarding old business and new business will be heard during each agenda topic after initial discussion by the commissioners or at the discretion of the chair. Speakers shall state their name, address. Comments are limited to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the chair. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard under citizen comment, which is at the end of the agenda. Also, a couple things on the agenda, just to let everybody know, new business A will be removed from today. It will be postponed, so there will be no discussion of the commissioners on the path forward for ClearSpace. And then also under old business A, we're going to get an update on the Grove Park Canal access. However, Matt Spong, who's going to give that presentation, is on his way in, and so we'll move in, and we'll just put Matt Spong on when he gets here, if that's okay with everybody.
It's fine.
And I think that's it. So if we can go to the city manager, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Happy to say that this past Saturday, the city held a dedication ceremony for Steve Elkins Way, and a huge thank you to all who participated and attended in this great event, especially the mayor and commissioners, Commissioner Byrne in particular, and of course, Faye Jacobs, Murray Archibald. Certainly a wonderful tribute to a wonderful man, Steve Elkins, who himself contributed so much. And I would just encourage everyone to take some time and walk through there and sit there and even possibly reflect on what a great city we have and what Steve had contributed to the city. The boardwalk restrooms, construction continues there on the 3 restrooms. During construction, 1 restroom will always remain open. Signage is posted to direct people to the open restroom. The farmers market opens tomorrow, Tuesday, May 7th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And the Blood Bank of Delmarva has partnered with the city of Rehoboth Beach for a blood drive to be held here at the Convention Center on Monday, May 13th, a week from today, from 12 noon to 6 p.m. Information for the blood drive is on the city website, or anyone can contact the communications department. Parking permits, just a reminder, parking permits and meters go into effect May 24th, the Friday before Memorial Day, and parking permits are required daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Meters are in effect from 10 a.m. through 10 p.m., and meter rates fluctuate depending on areas of the city from $2 to $3 per hour, with time limits varying from 30 minutes to 12 hours. The Munis software implementation continues. Both building permits and business licenses are presently being used in the system. The city's municipal election is scheduled for Saturday, August 10th, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the Convention Center, and the deadline for voter registration is the close of business on Thursday, July 11th. Anyone can vote if meet the requirements by absentee ballot, and a request for absentee ballot must be completed and filed no later than noon on Friday, August 9th, 2019. Election information is posted on the city website, as well as a notice of solicitation of candidates on the city website as well, the requirements for that. And just a footnote to Steve Elkins' Way, that tribute, Commissioner Schlosser, in addition to Commissioner Byrne, were instrumental in putting that together. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too, thank you all the commissioners for being there, Commissioner Schlosser and Commissioner Byrne for working with Camp Rehoboth to put that together. I think it was a great turnout for, somebody that we're really going to miss and who's done so much for the community. And I think it was great that the city was willing to work with Camp Rehoboth to put in this nice commemoration and memorial to him. And I just want to mention also what I noticed on Saturday there, how nice that whole pathway looks with all the vegetation and, the bushes that are put in. The city's done a great job, and so I commend the city, the staff, and the arborists for all that. And I think it's going to look great over the time. Yes, sir. Oh, I see. Just as Mr. Brittingham is reminding us, on First Street and Second Street at the traffic lights, as of May 1st, the no left turn went into effect, no right turn on red. So be very careful. I know everybody becomes accustomed to that through the winter. I know I do too, but there is no left turn as you come up to First or Second, and there is no right on red.
Mayor, can I just say one thing
Sure.
just in response to the city manager's comments? The city staff just worked above and beyond what would have been expected, even for their normal job, to help pull together this Steve Elkins Way project. Dick, you know the names more, but Billy, and I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Was incredibly helpful and outstanding in her support for the last several weeks and right up through getting everything out of there in the rain. And Bill Maffey, is that his name, on the Streets Department was outstanding in terms of his support. So thank you, City Manager.
Really
Very,
nice.
very
Thank you.
Thank
well
you.
done.
Anything from you, Glenn?
Nothing new to report, Mayor.
All right, and again, as I mentioned, we're going to bypass A for right now and move into B, which is a little bit of discussion of the path forward concerning the possibilities of a parking garage. As you all know, we did have EDIS and Colonial made a presentation to the commissioners 3 or 4 months ago about the potential possibilities and their ideas towards the possibilities of a parking garage right out here in the convention center parking lot. We had passed them on to the parking committee to get their point of view as well, so they made that presentation to them within the last couple of months. And as most of you know, from either being at the parking committee meeting or their minutes, they had suggested that a task force, if you will, or working group be put together of maybe a couple of commissioners as well as some business people downtown, Chamber, Main Street, and so on. And so fortunately, a few commissioners took it upon themselves to work with the city manager to put together what I think is a nice committee to get some ideas on, where we want to go, what we want to do, if we want to do. And they had their first meeting on Friday with representatives of the Chamber and of Main Street, a couple businesses, and I think in the future, someone from the fire company will be involved as well. So that was, I think, a productive meeting, but I'll turn it over to the city manager, who was the chair of the meeting.
And Mayor, the
further talk.
Homeowners Association,
Homeowners
Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association was also invited to send a representative who couldn't make it for the first public meeting, but I understand they're going to propose somebody for the future. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. Yes, those in attendance were Commissioner Sheffer, Calusi, Schlosser, the chair of the parking committee, the city's parking committee, Linda Kaufman, Carol Everhart representing the chamber, with Ed Chelsnowski, Rick Perry representing the planning commission, and Bob Cartwright representing retail establishment, and also Kathy Osterholm representing the Streets and Transportation Committee. So obviously, a continuation of a long-going discussion regarding, do we need a parking garage? What would that bring to the city? The gist of what was captured specifically from the chair of the parking committee, Ms. Kaufman, is that there are not enough spaces in the right area. Certainly the city has parking spaces, over 1,500 metered spaces. But what would a parking garage facility add? 200 additional spaces. We have 100, approximately 100 right now in that area, and a parking garage of 300 would facilitate 200 additional spaces. So much more discussion, obviously, is needed on that. The next meeting of the task force is scheduled for June 19th at 9 a.m., and at that time, we'll make a recommendation whether to move forward or not, and ask the mayor and commissioners to continue to pursue this, and whether or not that would be beneficial or not. So again, ongoing discussions, and I know that this has occurred several years ago, and it's just a continuation of that to try to resolve some of these issues.
Any comments from the commissioners?
The only one that I would like to not lose track of is all the work that the parking committee has done in the past as well. And when it was originally presented, I recall Chair Linda Kaufman talking about how it was really a holistic approach, and it's a package. And now with the discussions of a parking garage, it would be probably a prudent thing for us to do at some juncture to go back and revisit what's been left on the table from all of the recommendations, and maybe just give it a fresh consideration and see what we think about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the parking committee took a lot of time and effort over the last 6 months of last year, or last 4 or 5 months of last year, and presented to us a lot of different ideas. Some we did implement, many we did not implement. But, you know, as I said at that point in time, and I think most agree, that parking is something that's kind of continually evolving. We haven't changed it much in the last 10 or 15 years. And, you know, whether it's a parking garage or angled-in parking or one-way streets or things like that, certain rates, I think these are things that we should be you know, in the back of our mind as we're focusing on a project like the possibility of a parking garage. You know, we will have a full summer to figure a lot of things out, but I think a lot of these things will come up during the summer, and we may want to, again, have the parking committee take a look at what we can do going forward, what we didn't do in the past. And I think going back to what you had said, you know, this parking garage idea, I think, has been going on in Rehoboth for 20-plus years. And most recently, Linda Kaufman did a parking, you know, survey kind of analysis on a parking garage when the city was thinking about a different shape of the campus here. And at that point in time, I think she came up with some ideas that on a conservative basis, with the city, you know, borrowing the money at that point in time, it could pay for itself with maintenance and inflation over, you know, 10 to 15 to so many years. And so I think now the opportunity that's now been presented to us by one vendor, and I would imagine that we'll probably have to go out to a group if we pursue this, that, you know, these other people are thinking about it as a viable financial situation that might work from an economic perspective, that, you know, if they can put down the equity in the long run, I think it's a good positive thing. But there are a lot of legal ramifications that we have to just make sure that we take a look at, and I think that's where this task force comes into play. So I think what you said, Commissioner Sharp, is well taken, that, you know, there are a lot of things with parking. It's not just a parking garage.
So, Mayor, if I could make a few comments regarding that. You know, the parking committee has done such a fabulous job, and they did have some recommendations that I would consider low-hanging fruit. Two of them that I'd like to see us consider at the next meeting or so to start talking about. And one of them is the idea of the head-in parking. There are several streets, I think, that could be looked into by the city. Oak Avenue on the north side, Pennsylvania Avenue, Lakeview, King Charles. So I'd like to see us talk about that.
Angled in parking, not head-in parking, because we got something on the agenda about
Yeah.
heading. You're talking angled in.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's all well and good.
Yeah.
But I don't think we
that
can,
and signage. That's
Yeah.
what I'd like to see on the
yeah,
next
I don't think we
agenda.
can take this any further to today's thing.
No,
because-
that's what I said. I would like to see this on an agenda item coming up, either next agenda or workshop, either one.
Yeah, maybe after the next June meeting that you all have for the parking garage task force, then we'll take it from there. Any other?
Yeah, Mayor, perhaps it goes without saying, but one of the things that struck me sitting in the audience, listening to the parking committee last week, was how if RFPs and then the concept of RFQs goes out, how that can contribute to the body of research and data to help the city determine the best way forward, that we can garner creative ideas and different kinds of thoughts from vendors as this goes forward. That goes beyond just what the committee, commissioners, and our public may think of.
Any,
Public comment.
yeah, I would just want to get the commissioners first.
Okay.
Any other?
I just want to reiterate two things from the meeting. So first of all, I think it was very well organized, very well attended. It was a great group. I think we're fortunate to have some of the people we have on that committee that are such experts in parking and other things. One of the key points from that meeting is, although there was, one particular organization that submitted a proposal, I want to reiterate what Commissioner Burns said, and that is we have a really good opportunity as we go forward to perhaps do some sort of RFQ or RFP, depending on what the group recommends, to get ideas on how we could move forward and help even maybe solve some of the parking problems, even beyond the small group of commissioners or the small group of folks on that committee, and just be innovative with what we're doing here. So I look forward to continuing to get those ideas from many, many, many sources through this process. Thank you.
Yes. Please.
68 Kent Street. I have a handout, if it's okay. I thought I made enough, but apparently I didn't. So
We can
We can
share.
share.
have to share.
Thank you for making this.
So what you're looking at is our house on 68 Kent Street.
Oh, okay.
July 27th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a Sunday, and the house is engulfed in fire. I'm bringing up, no matter what direction the city goes with parking or hotels, the issue of congestion. That was 16 years ago. The volunteer firemen couldn't get into the city to get to their fire equipment to get to our house. And now, I'm just saying, that was 16 years ago. It totally engulfed our house. You can find it on the Cape Gazette or the Delaware Press, Post Press. It was, didn't help that the Canal Bridge was in the process of going down after letting a boat in, out. So you even had a more exasperated situation. So I'm just asking, whatever road you go down, please make sure that fire and public safety is, in the headlight there. That you don't just say, well, we'll put up 3 hotels, a parking garage, and then the fire department can't get to the houses. Our houses are very close. It damaged, not only destroyed our house, but it also caused damage to our next door neighbor's house. The fire department did the best job they could do with when they could get there and what they had. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
Someone else?
Gary Glass, 105 Country Club Drive. I have 2 questions. The composition of the task force is a little curious to me because I don't think it has a strong representation of actual homeowners in the city. It has a lot of business people involved, and there are a lot of homeowners who are extremely concerned about this parking garage. And I think it would do the city well to have both sides of the discussion sitting at the table, engaged in the discussion. And I think that this was a hand-selected committee secretly or something. Members of the community weren't given an opportunity to submit a request to be a member of that committee. And it was just thrown together, and I think it was handpicked, and I think it's very one-sided. What I think the citizens are most concerned about, which the committee was asked at their task force meeting and no answer was given, is ultimately who's financially responsible for this parking garage. A citizen and business owner brought up the fact that if the economy goes south and the parking garage doesn't produce the required revenue, who picks up the tab for the construction of the parking garage, the maintenance of the parking garage, and the ongoing operation of the parking garage? Nobody has been able to give a clear answer. And I think if that question was answered, it might govern how we go forward and how much effort we spend looking at this. The other question that I think is important for this parking garage, and that if we had citizen representation on this task force, we might be able to get to the answers to these questions, is revenue shifting. Are we going to shift a lot of revenue from residential parking into the parking garage and share that with the contractors of that parking garage and operators, and therefore have a deficit in the revenue that we take in from residential parking, which we rely on for the operations of our government budget? And will the residents and homeowners have to make up the difference by tripling or quadrupling our homeowners' taxes to pay that deficit? And I think these are two extremely important questions that really govern how much effort we really want to spend going forward. And these questions can't be answered. The people representing the committee on the task force are many business people that are highly involved in the business community that do not want to even participate by paying a hotel tax in the operations of our government. So all of this will fall back on the residents. And I think the residents have a right to have a strong representation in these issues, and I think we would have a better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me answer the first portion. As it was just mentioned up here, we're talking about an RFQ, an RFP. All of these questions from a finance perspective will come out at that point in time. We're so early in the process, we're not going to just go out here and willy-nilly throw some money at something and then, who cares about what happens down the street. Now, in the second part, or the first part, Commissioner Sheffer is a resident. Commissioner Taluzzi is a resident. Commissioner Schlosser is a resident. The head of the parking committee, a resident. The head of the street and transportation committee, a resident. That's more than half of the committee is made up of residents. Any further questions?
Rick Perry.
Oh, Rick Perry, another one. These are all residents. I think there's one business owner on that committee. Please. No, I'm just trying to answer your questions.
And Mayor, it was made clear in that meeting, and I made clear, and maybe I'll say it again. We asked for a representative from the Homeowners Association. They couldn't make the meeting. We re-asked the president of the Homeowners Association this weekend, for a name or names, whatever they want to provide, for the committee. So the homeowners group is being asked to provide members. So, and we will continue to follow up and get a member or members. So, and then number two, to reiterate what the mayor said, this is very early in a process, and these questions are not being ignored. You don't have a group of people who are sitting there scratching heads, not knowing the answers. We want to get public input. We want to go through an RFQ, go through an RFP, and get answers above and beyond what 7 people here or 8 or 10 people on a committee can provide, and figure out a best practice approach to solving some of these problems. So it is way too early. It's not a matter of people not knowing or not asking the questions. Of course we're going to ask those questions. But we want to do it with the input from a lot of people over a period of time, not just sitting in one meeting to answer a question that we want to get more input on. So anybody can look at the minutes. It's a public meeting. Anybody can come to the meeting. And if you're part of the Homeowners Association, please be the one that volunteers when the solicitation goes out for names to come and be a formal part of the group. Thank you.
simple questions. Nothing is, no disrespect. I'm trying to find out information. Has there been an appointment? I understand it was answered at the meeting that the city manager it is her committee. She's the committee chair. Was there anything put out, a press release about the makeup of this committee and the meeting that came about?
It was announced, the meeting was, an agenda was put up.
My perception was that it was out there. It was an interesting meeting. RFPs came up. It was well conducted. But it was like it came out of the cold. There's so many meetings in the week, you cannot attend them all. It'd be kind of nice to read about it in the Cape Gazette or on the city's website to try to figure out what to go to. But in any case, keep up the good work. And I also appreciate the comments you said about the identity of the commissioners also being residents. I had also overlooked that. But I think moving forward, but it is moving very fast, and there's a lot of things we're not getting done in Rehoboth right now for summer to be plowing forward with something that never came out before approximately October of last year. Thank you.
Well, I disagree that it's moving fast, and there was a response in the Cape Gazette a month or so ago after the parking committee did review this presentation, and they did suggest a task force. Someone else had, yes, please.
Thank you. Donna Mabry, 221 Hickman. Several points. I agree with Gary in that, I think it would be best to have a very broad cross-section of representation on the committee as it goes forward. I think the broader the cross-section on this, the better. And I'm glad to hear that you're seeing this in the early stages and that you're going to research it very carefully, because I think the financial aspect could be very tricky. I think the devil's going to be in the details, and I don't know how much, a public or a private entity, how much input they would want to have in all of Rehoboth's parking revenue or parking, how they would maybe impact how we do parking throughout town. And I'd be concerned about Rehoboth putting one of its primary revenue sources in jeopardy of coordinating that with a private for-profit entity. So I think, so I'm glad to hear you're going slow and you're going to go very, very cautiously in looking at those details. Two simple questions. Number one, now, in a previous meeting, you mentioned that our metered parking was closer to 1,700 meters, and today you say 1,500. So is currently our metered parking, is it closer to 1,500 or 1,700, or what would be a good accurate number of meters we currently have?
Excuse me. Between 1,500 and 1,700. It's probably closer to, I think the numbers may be 1,564 off the top of my head, so something like that.
I just want to know what, okay. And in line with that, how much other parking do we provide? Like, what's our other street parking that we provide permits to already? Like, I'm just curious, what is Rehoboth's total parking capacity right now? Miles. Yes, but how many cars is that? Like, how many people can we park? I mean, there's got to be an estimate.
Well, I would think if you look at the most crowded parking in the city is probably when we have fireworks.
Sure.
So I'd say 50, 75,000 people. So divide that by
yeah,
3 or 4.
Really? You think it's that?
There's a lot of space in the city.
But he was saying people, not parking.
I know, he said
spots.
divide by 4 to get the number of cars. So, I mean, really, I think it'd be very helpful to estimate how much parking we already provide on the street.
We should seek a volunteer to count spaces for us, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe somebody, the homeowners.
Maybe Google could do it for us. Well, how many meters do we sell in the summer? Or permits, how many permits do we sell in the summer?
Well, we have statistics on that, certainly.
Well, that might be helpful to know, because I just think it'd be helpful to the public to know how much parking we already provide and what's out there. Because I think a lot of people who don't come into town, they don't realize how much we have. There's a misperception that we don't have parking, and that's what's hurting things. So we need to counteract that, I think. Okay, now, my other question, a simple one, is what is an RFQ?
Request for, for qualifications. Request for
For qualifications? You mean like someone who might bid, or
Yes.
like?
Process is basically with procurements, the kind of best practice people are using is you go out and you lay out kind of generally where you want to be with the initiative, and folks come in and say, I'm qualified to do this because of these 5 things, and you get that list of qualified vendors, and then you send them a more detailed request for proposal.
Okay.
So
I
it's an
wasn't
RFQ then an
familiar.
RFP.
Okay.
Steve, am I right on that? You're more of the
You're
contract
spot
guy.
on, spot on.
Okay.
Okay, so you're just looking for people who are in that business, who might be bidders.
Exactly.
Qualified for that. Okay.
Qualified, yes.
Thank you very,
exactly.
thank you.
Sure.
Just in follow-up to your comment on residents, you and I have had a conversation many times about the way people think about these issues. The people that you stated were residents that you placed on this committee are very pro-business community people. I don't think there's a resident or a property owner in town that isn't for a successful business community in this town. But it needs to be a balance of fairness and who's going to pay for everything that we do. I'm saying that the committee needs to be made up of some people who aren't so pro-business that they're willing to spend any dollar that they think they need to promote business in this town, and the homeowners that want to make sure that we can pay our property taxes and that we can retain and maintain our property values. If we continue to keep tacking on debt for a canal dock and a parking garage and the sewer plant and the water plant improvements and stormwater runoff, which really needs to be addressed, we're going to put this town in a position where we have so much debt that our property values are going to drop like a lead balloon out of the sky. So I think the property owners have a right to protect their property values, and I think you need to have a balance. It's not that anybody's against the business community, it's that we want to make sure that it's balanced. And I think a lot of the people that you have on there that you quoted as residents, and I'm not saying they're not, but they're very, very pro-business. It's good to have both sides of the coin. You made a comment to me a couple times that now it's our turn, meaning I think the business community's turn to take over and control the town. I think it should be we all work together to make the town better and not divide the town. And you can not divide the town by making the task force a healthy, balanced task force with people that have a variety of views. And then we can bring all the views to the table. And I think you've stacked the committee with a single perception.
Thank you.
And
else,
I'd like to
please?
offer just a couple of things on this before I know you'd probably like to move on to the next
Please
topic.
do.
But first, I think it would be helpful to have something that I would refer to like parking by the numbers. That's just a one-page sheet that kind of summarizes what we really do have to offer. And it could honestly fall short of counting every single space, but maybe just a good view of what's the story of parking by the numbers here in Rehoboth, so that I think we'd have a little bit more of consistency as we talk about what's factual as we move these projects forward. And the other thing I'd like to do is give one of the members of the parking committee that Linda Kaufman chairs. His name is Mark Saunders. I want to give Mark Saunders a shout out from the standpoint that when they were initially back in March talking about the potential of a parking garage, Mark Saunders already began the questioning regarding the risk, financial, in the approach that was being just proposed. So he was already going down that line. There was, I went to that meeting, and he was putting forward exactly the concern that I think is being heard here today. So let it be known, he's a full-time resident here, and he does have the interest of all of us that are property owners and taxpayers at heart, and he immediately, as part of the overall proposal, wanted more information about that, which I believe everybody will, as we get a little bit further along and wrap our arms around not only do we need a parking garage and be able to justify that, and then have all of our committee input working together. So I was really excited about the fact of how the parking committee itself back in March received the potential, and then the new group in their initial meeting. I want to emphasize, this was their initial meeting. So I think they've got quite a runway to, a better analogy would be a freeway. A freeway of additional meetings and conversations. So I just wanted to let it be known that Mark Saunders was a real leader in this issue about financial risk and how to understand that. So.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mayor, just two quick things on that. One is, I think Mark Sanders, a member of the Homeowners Association, pretty active, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe we could mention that to Charlie, who we're going to follow up with to get a name or names. Sharon, perhaps we could follow up with him. We can talk afterwards on that. And the second thing that I wanted to mention on this is that there was actually a study done in 2007 by Linda Kaufman. And it actually outlines, it looks to me, I've looked over it a couple times in preparation for the parking meeting, but it looks to me it actually has a listing of all the parking spaces. So Sharon, I just found it again and sent it to you. Maybe we could share that and maybe have somebody, I think Evan's supporting us, or somebody from your team, just to use that maybe and come up at least with a ballpark. It's very well done, very thorough. So I sent that to you again and pulled it out of the archives, so it might be a good starting point.
I believe that parking study is available online.
Yeah, I found it. I believe I found it publicly, if I'm not mistaken. So
Is it in the legislative portal?
I don't know if I could find it again. It's 2007, so we could certainly share that at the next meeting if we could. So. Sure. Yeah, I think it should be shared. Yeah. Sure, I think it already is. I'm pretty sure that's where I
Yeah, we
got
can
it.
ask
So,
Linda.
sure. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that was there and something I think would be helpful for the group.
Great. Anything else? If not, we'll just move on to the next one. And again, Matt Spong's not here, so we'll postpone again. The next on new business B, it's kind of new business, kind of old business. And I made this pretty broad in that it's a discussion of path forward with licensing agreements of city property and more specificity with screening of trash, gas, receptacles presently on city property. There's kind of two sections here. One, if we want to talk about, and Ann included the license agreements that we do have on file, and how we want to go forward with that. But I think we've already spoken about that a lot, and I think through the most recent situation, I think we pretty much so determined that obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but pretty much so. The majority of the commissioners were kind of the consensus new construction. There probably shouldn't be a need for licensing agreements, but if we want to take that further. But then the second part of it, which was also came out, was the discussion of specifically the alleyway behind Rehoboth Avenue, Wilmington Avenue. It's by the Martin's Lawn Park there. And, there are 4 or 5 restaurants that actually do use city space for dumpsters. And, maybe the discussion on that subject, if you guys want to go into that, I have to recuse myself on that portion. I don't have to recuse myself on the licensing portion but I think we've pretty much so discussed the licensing portion.
The only thing on the licensing, I've mentioned this before, 84 Kent, and I know that I really think that we should sell that piece of property. So I don't know how everybody else feels up here.
I think we should probably, that's not necessarily a licensing discussion, more of a real estate discussion.
Well, that's true, but I'm just mentioning it because we do have a lease agreement with the Kiwanis Club, so
Yeah.
that would need to be, we would need to end
And I would
that.
think with real estate, do we have to have a,
You can discuss it in executive session if you're considering the sale or acquisition of real estate.
yeah,
You don't have to
we
do it, but you
we
could.
may want to do that for that. as we go
Okay,
forward.
thank you.
But if there's nothing on the licensing side, I will step away.
No,
Okay.
I don't think you need to, for my comments. One is just to reiterate what I've said before, and that was that if we were going to go forward with issuing license agreements to become zoning compliant in new construction, then there needed to be a fee structure commensurate with using public lands and maybe use of the assessment. Now that we're away from that, what that leaves us with, in my view, looking these over, is license agreements that are longstanding, that existed generally prior to the zoning code coming into place. And so they are done in part because the city allowed them to do it. And so I don't think there should be any penalty, and I'm fine with the low price as long as we're comfortable with the fee covering our legal expenses. And I think that's what came up before. Should there be a minimum fee so that it covers our legal expenses? And I believe they should be. And the other part of the discussion, I think Commissioner Cluzy had mentioned to me after the last meeting was yes, to look at the alley. And what I would say is to broaden it, and I think we need to do an inventory citywide of any and all properties that are using public property in part or fully. And that would include the alley then. And I think that if we find that there are businesses or people using public property, then we need to formalize it with a license agreement. And the license agreement, of course, necessarily would have conditions on there also, specific to the alley, or any of these places, is it proper? Is it an eyesore? Is it overused? Is it too big? Can we screen things if we're allowing them and put conditions on it? That's what I think we should do. Inventory everything, formalize it with license agreement, and then put conditions on those license agreements. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry, Ted. Well, two comments. One, I actually agree mostly with what Commissioner Mills said. I am definitely in favor of licensing agreements. When we say public land, it's not us sitting up here. It's not our land. It's anybody that has property here, does business here, who lives here, and so they should have a right to, have us use that land. I mean, it's not our land; it's the public's land. So that's one comment when I think about it. Two, I just had a question, just off the top of the head or top of your head, City Manager. How many actually how many licenses have been disapproved, say over the past, you've been here 3-4 years, that you're aware of by the commissioners? We've had, I know I was involved with Lake Avenue and that vote and the one last week, which I'm not going to get into details, Mayor, but how many have actually been disapproved by the Board of Commissioners? How many requests for these type of licenses? In your recollection, I'm just curious.
I can't actually think of any that.
Okay, or the
during my
solicitor,
time
I'm just
here.
curious.
I can't. Over the past decade, other than the one last week or whenever that was, that I don't think there has been one. Now, they've been very infrequent when they've come before the Board of Commissioners. I mean, there's
Okay.
only been a very small handful of them in the last
Okay.
decade.
Okay, and none have been disapproved
And
except
none
the
were
loud.
disapproved. That's right.
Okay,
But I
and
can
it's,
recall.
so in that case, I think we kind of need, maybe this is a little bit what Commissioner Mills was getting at, but we probably need some criteria, because over 10 years, only deny one license. It just seems, even though there was some good reasons brought up as to why that vote went the way it did, it seems we need criteria. So as we're thinking about this and moving forward, what is the criteria for a license? I'd love to have it written down so it's fair to everybody that requests one. So that's just my comments on licensing.
Well, along those lines, I think what's come up over the last couple of meetings, because we have been discussing this, is that the majority of the licensing agreements that we have outstanding are older. And we're not so much new construction. I don't recall many of them. Many of them that had come in front of us were because maybe the change of ownership, but the use was still out there. And that's why they were asking for it, similar to maybe 45 and a half on the lake. Whereas I think what really kind of materialized through this whole situation on Rehoboth Avenue was new construction, code compliance, Section 215 in order to get a permit of compliance. I think in the past, a lot of people have made the assumption when there was a transition of one business to another business, and specifically in the restaurant businesses, that once you got your approval on 215 for your permit of compliance, that everything was set going forward, your building permit, so on and so forth, which I don't know if we've spoken up loud enough to say that that is not the case. That Section 215 is completely about restaurants serving alcohol, period. And I think it kind of got mushed in between in that some people just assumed that since I had that permit of compliance, my building plans are just going to be approved. And then I think what it came up as well was that a lot of people started standing up and saying, well, with new construction, I don't know that the city should be giving a license agreement to become code compliant. And I think that's where things have gotten meshed together. Whereas in some of these places that we have honored a license to transfer, maybe it's because the liquor license transferred and it was no new construction. All of a sudden, we're going to push walls out onto the city streets or trash cans in this case. So I think that's where the policy needs to be looked at a little bit further in that, okay, if it's new construction, are we going to provide a license for somebody who's not code compliant to become code compliant by giving them the license? And I think the consensus was kind of leaning against that. But, so that's where the discussions have to come from.
It's a valid point. If that's what the commissioners or the direction the city wants to go, then just to underscore, then I think we need to be fair and transparent and get that word out to anyone so that there's not assumptions being made in the process. So it's a valid consideration, of course, and it definitely. I just want to be fair and have it somehow codified that that's the approach we're now taking.
Yeah, and I think that's what took place. But I think unfortunately in this circumstance, and I think it came out in a couple of the meetings, there was just the assumption by the applicant that, oh, since you gave me a permit of compliance, and in my permit of compliance, I had this little picture that showed that I was going to use part of city property, that it must be okay. And I think that's where things slipped through the cracks. But it's changed since then, so I think we did the right thing.
Commissioner Schlosser mentions developing criteria. I'm not sure that's doable, workable, or wise because to me it's a subjective process. Each one's individually, and again, my suggestion to do a citywide inventory. Part of that would be you find something on city property, the city manager, I think administratively could, as a first step, could say, well, if it's not legal, it needs to get off city property, first of all. And then if the client or whoever it is says, yes, indeed, we need that space and we seek a license agreement, then again, that comes in front of this group. And there's a process there where it comes in front of us and we determine whether it's needed or not and what conditions are, et cetera.
So just a curiosity, maybe I should know this, but I do not. On the trash and gas receptacles? Does our code require that they be screened?
The business trash?
Yes.
Business trash in the C1, C2, and C3 zones, which is all the commercial zones, there's a section under refuse that says their refuse must be screened from public view, and then define screening as things such as fencing, lattice, vegetation, all that. So the answer is yes.
So is it fair to ask the question, are all of the trash and gas receptacles, do they comply with that code?
Fair to ask the question, and the answer is no.
No. So my follow-up question would be obvious. Why not? And I'm not expecting an answer. Maybe that's food for thought, that if it's in the code, and I guess it comes from where I view things, that if the code doesn't matter, then why should anybody comply with the code? If the code matters, then to me, everybody complies with the code.
Well, I don't think it's a question of the code not mattering. I think it's a question of, over the years, it was difficult to enforce that. I think the city has enforced, has done some enforcement, certainly not all, but it's just difficult for property owners, especially in certain areas, to be able to screen their trash. I know I've had discussions along Rehoboth Avenue with folks. I know this has been a big bone of contention for Commissioner Mills, and in working with Commissioner Mills and certain businesses, we were able to get them to contain it a little better, but not necessarily screen everything.
I also mentioned that provision that Commissioner Mills mentions is from 27027, which is a zoning provision. So typically when a zoning law is changed, existing conditions are grandfathered. So we have a lot around the city that's been grandfathered. Any new construction project in the commercial zones is required to provide screening with their design.
And if we go much further, I need to step away. So,
Yeah.
I mean, are we?
No, I'm not going any
Glenn,
further.
is the definition of new after a certain date? What is the date?
Well, after the
that
date of the adoption. I mean, once the ordinance goes on the books, which this is on the books, anything new that comes through building and licensing from the date of that ordinance would have been required to provide screening. And any redevelopment project, if there's a tear down and redevelopment, it'll be required.
That's a good question. Do we want to, at this point, actually address potentially screening and making sure this is enforced? Or do we want to put this off? I mean, I think that the agenda item called for the discussion of that. And I know that you'll have to recuse, but I don't know, do you?
I mean, maybe, as Commissioner Mills says, there's a way to do some kind of an inventory of the type of things that actually exist at the moment.
And then move forward after that? That makes sense to me. I'm good with that.
Makes sense to me. Let's gather the data and see what the situation is, and then
Okay.
take a look.
Sounds good.
Gary Glass. I think this whole discussion came up with regards to the Wilmington Avenue street behind Rehoboth Avenue. And I think from what I hear from most citizens is they would love to see that street cleaned up. And what I've been told, and it's long before I was here, that some of those buildings changed use. They were retail space and then they became a restaurant. When they started out, they had these small roll-around dumpsters that were about 2.5, 3 feet, sticking out into the street. Now they've moved to these great big cubic yard dumpsters, and I don't know if they got permission to do that under the grandfathering. I don't know what they were grandfathered, but now they have these huge dumpsters back there, and then they're cleaning their filters, and it's all running down into the stormwater runoff drains, and that whole street needs to be cleaned up. And there could even be, somebody was saying to me the other day, some parallel parking by the senior citizen maybe and stuff. But anyway, I would hope that you would work towards cleaning up that street and any place else that's an eyesore to the city.
Anything else? All right, we'll move on to old business A, Mr. Matt Spong. Please. And this is an update permitting requirements, current status of the Grove Park Canal access. And this is Mr. Matt Spong from Landscape Architectural Services. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning, Matt.
Morning.
I just stick this PowerPoint in here somewhere, or can somebody accommodate me? I'm not a big techie. Oh, yeah, that's where it is. Okay, thanks for having me, and I apologize for being a little tardy. I know you're busy with other agenda items and other city business and your own businesses and everything, but we're happy to be here and excited to present this at this time after having worked on it for almost a decade. Can you believe that? Of course, it's a great project, recreational, environmentally, educationally, fun, and transportation-wise. But we don't have to get into all that because we did that the other 2 or 3 times we were here. I have a spare if that's not on there.
Plugged it in the wrong port.
Oh, good. Better you than me. Okay. Okay, let's see. Oops. What's this? Starting tour. I don't want to start a tour. Next. No, I don't want to share file. Okay, here we go. This first slide, of course, is the ultimate goal at the end. It may change slightly we've been through design development and permitting, but it's not going to be that much different. Of course, we still have some things to select, like the color of the wall and the actual plant materials and things like that, but we're a lot further along since we were when we did this. We're just going to briefly run through these. There's quite a few of them. Unless anybody has any questions, we can stop or we can go back to it later. Some of the things we did was an existing conditions topography and survey, which just verified what we had been using in the concept phase in terms of the grade change, which is about 20 feet from the top to the bottom, and verifying that there's some existing utilities in the area. And we're pretty confident that they can all be accommodated. And we had some discussions with the Public Works Director about that at our meeting last Wednesday. One thing we also did was we had a 30-day title study done by our consultant, Atlantic Survey and Mapping, and Peter Lowenstein, who's a registered hydrographer. And this just determines the high and mean low water and all the highs and lows for a 30-day period, which was done in October 3rd to November 9th, and included a full moon period, and the readings were taken at 5-minute intervals tied into the NAVD datum, which is good because that's the one our surveyors tied into. And the results were mean high is 2.1, mean low is a minus 0.8. The highest elevation, which was on a full moon, was 3.01, and the lowest elevation was on 1020. Not sure why that happens, but it was minus 1.29. The next things we're going through are the permits and so forth that have been acquired. One thing that was done early on was an extension of the current lease with the Army Corps of Engineers. It originally expired like in a couple years from now. I don't remember what the date was, but we got it extended from 2018 to 2043. And according to the Army Corps, as long as the lease terms are abided by, which there's no reason they can't be, this can be renewed indefinitely. But they will not do it for longer than 25 years at a shot. And this is just a supplement where it was signed. Permit approvals and letters of no objection included the Architectural Accessibility Board, since this will have state funding through DelDOT and Department of Natural Resources. And it's a public project, so the trick is to get from elevation 22 down to about elevation 2 or whatever we're going to set the dock at, and do it so a person with challenges, accessibility or handicap, I'm not sure what the proper word is anymore, you have to have a slope less than 8.3% or 1 in 12. So they can be accommodated people using wheelchairs and that have other handicaps. And there's also requirements for handrails on both sides of the ramp, which that's considered a ramp. And then there's a landing every, I believe, 35 to 40 feet. And sometimes we did it less than that, which is okay. So people can stop and rest. And that also gives you an opportunity to, look at the canal from those vantage points. Construction authorization was granted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on March the 13th, after a 6-month process of back and forth and looking at plans and this, that, and the other. So you can see at the bottom here, there's like 10 people that they copied on them, which is one reason the process takes so long, because once they even approve it, then they have to have their chief engineer and the judicial section sign off. So that process alone took another month after we had an email that we were approved. But yeah, that's the way it works. And then there's a permission letter from the Army Corps of Engineers for Section 408 applicability. And this has that because this is a navigable canal. Only the Lewis-Rehoboth Canal, the C&D Canal, and the Nanticoke River in Delaware are subject to Section 408 review. Now, the Lewis-Rehoboth Canal is more or less a recreational canal at this point, but originally it was going to be a commercial canal and might have had some other issues from a government standpoint. I don't know if they were thinking of it as being something for defense or whatever. But by the time it was built in the 20s, it was started in 1908, the railroad had already come and taken the place of the canal. So it never really did the commercial application that it was supposed to have. But it's still under the jurisdiction of Section 408. Coastal Zone Management Consistency Program this is pursuant to the Coastal Zone Management Act of 1972, and I won't read all that, but you can read it. Anything that's on a water body between the C&D Canal and I guess Fenwick Island, and also any other navigable water body, even if they're not a Section 408, has to comply with the Coastal Zone Management Consistency Program. And this is a letter of compliance. This is the permit plan, which of course you can't see it at that scale, but it basically shows the final alignment and where the ramp is going to be, where the existing deck is, which is kind of right there, and then the bottom part, which is kind of a ramp boardwalk, and then a gangway that goes down to the floating docks. This is a final application for the compliance to the state of Delaware's sediment and stormwater management regulations. And this is conducted by the Sussex Conservation District, which does it on behalf of the Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control. But due to the fact that this project is only really adding less than 4,000 square feet of impervious area, and it is close to an existing stormwater outlet, and there's already stormwater outlets that go into the canal, we can do what's called a standard application process, which is a little less time-consuming and detailed. And they also have a criteria under that for a sidewalk, trail, or other linear impervious surface improvements, which actually, that part of it is only like 3,000 square feet because it's only the top part of the ramp that applies to that. And we talked to the assistant manager last week and have been talking to him, for the last 6 months, and he's in agreement with that. And I have a meeting set up with him tentatively for next week, and I've emailed him the 50% construction documents, and we're on board to get that part done, which will be the last of our required permits for this project. This is the wetlands and subaqueous land section permit. It describes only the part of the work that is that impacts between high tide and mean high and mean low. Everything that's above that is not regulated by the Department of Natural Resources Wetlands and Subaqueous Lands section. The next thing we're going to talk about briefly is where we are with some grant applications that were made last summer after I was here in July and working with the city and the city staff, the city manager, the mayor, Evan, Pat Caluzzi, everybody else. Anyways, so we made a presentation at DelDOT looking for some funding, and they were, I'll say, gracious enough to grant us a $300,000 grant for a transportation alternative program. And this is because it has so many applications in terms of a trail that connects to the Junction Breakwater Trail, and it also has the potential, and it will, once the water taxi, tour boat, and all that gets underway, reduce several hundred average daily trips a week on Route 1. And as we all know, in the summer, I had an experience, and I know you've all had that too, so I don't have to tell you, but coming from 5 Points to the cutoff here during the summertime, even if you're going south and everybody else is changing, is going north later in the day, it takes 2 hours at least. And the water taxi can do it in a leisurely trip of 45 minutes. And I think I also forgot to mention that this is a great tourism and economic connector between the city of Lewis and the city of Rehoboth. So people can come to Rehoboth and Lewis and stay there and go in there. They can park their car, walk wherever they want to, go on all the trails and all those great things. And if they want to come to Rehoboth or vice versa, Rehoboth to Lewis, they can get on the water taxi and not even have to get in their car and worry about that and have a nice leisurely trip. And then there's all kinds of scenic and historic and ecological things they can learn about the canal on that trip. The next one is the Department of Natural Resources Outdoor Recreation Park and Trail Grant. We were fortunate to get a $90,000 grant, which this year there was a lot of competition for that because some other grants weren't available and they didn't give one the year before. And it's also a possibility that we could be eligible for a second installment this year, which we put as part of this original grant if needed. But that's a different process. So, we can talk about that, and we have till, I think, the end of this month for a preliminary, but I don't think we need to do the preliminary because we already did the preliminary and it was approved for 2 phases. So I think all we have to do is a second one if we decide to do that, but we'll confirm that. This was just an article that was in the paper, and I'm sure you all have read about it. Now that they passed some new taxes and really transfer things and whatever, and the economy's gotten better, now they're talking about a budget surplus for this year. And as last year, the governor's suggesting that about half of that last week was $10 million. Would probably be dedicated to open space, recreation, and these are one-time projects, infrastructure projects, so they wouldn't burden the budget in future years. And I would think, of course, it'll take some legislative connections and so forth, that perhaps some of this could be available for this project. This was a donor opportunities plan, and I think Mark Carter or somebody wants to maybe talk a little bit about what the LRCIA, Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association, has done on some fundraising efforts.
Good morning. My name is Mark Carter, and I'm part of the LRCI, the Canal Improvement Association, working on this project. I have a little update for you, and I'm going to reference this so I have my numbers correct. But so to date, we've raised over $10,000 from private citizens, donors, and such in the area. And as Matt mentioned, $300,000 from DelDOT, $92,000 from the ORPT grant, without an opportunity to reapply for another go-around of that. We've also acquired a $50,000 pledge from a local business, and we're in discussions with several other businesses. Recently, working with Senator Lopez, we look at, he's looking at committing $100,000 to the project as well. And speaking with Senator Lopez and Representative Schwarzkopf, we don't have the exact number yet from Representative Schwarzkopf, but it would likely be at least a match, so an additional $100,000 with an opportunity for some more on that. Looking at those numbers, that puts us around $650,000 towards the project. As a nonprofit, we are working with foundations in the area, Longwood Foundation, Delaware Community Foundation, and the such. And we're working with them to apply for grants. We actually have one grant in currently for a $75,000 gift, or grant, excuse me. And that's in the spring cycle. If we're approved for that, that would be awarded in late June, midsummer timeframe. If we working with them, if they suggest that we apply in the fall, that could go up in number as far as the amount, and possibly $150,000. The Longwood Foundation grant that we're in the process of applying for, that will go into the fall cycle. And that grant, we've got a site visit actually, I believe in about a week or two, to walk the site with Longwood. And that grant will be put in for at least $150,000. So with those kind of numbers, looking at the total estimated cost on this, we're almost to the point of having the entire project paid for through grants and funding from other sources. So I just want to put that out there. And also I wanted to thank the city for working with us on the project. Once that relationship really started, we were able to, I think everyone saw the process of how grants work, and we were able to really put a lot of funds towards the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Could I ask a question, sir? I'm just curious. Seems like a lot of work is going into getting pledges and funding, et cetera, from your report. When you talk to people about this project, how do you characterize when it would be built?
Well,
what do you tell people?
There's always in the perfect world, and then there's in the world. So there's always two ways to look at it. In the perfect world, it would be great to see the project up and running by next summer. And I think that's something that, depending on how the grant cycles go and funding and the city's involvement and such and approvals, et cetera, and everything, there's an opportunity that we could see something happening within the next 12 to 18 months, I would say. Now, that's, the perfect world. Of course, the commissioners and such and will discuss and work on the timeline according to what works with the city as well.
Were you done, Tony?
I
Oh,
am for the
please.
moment. Go ahead.
This is kind of quick. Is your request for donations in the budget and such include kind of maintenance fees and costs, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry if you already answered that, but just to kind of clarify it in my head.
We're actually, the way we're working on the campaign is to actually go above what is needed. And that would be funds that could be put towards maintenance and such. And then as an organization, we would see the organization coming on board as like a friends group, because this is one, the canal goes all the way to Dewey, and if you look, you could take it all the way to Milton if you go up the river. So there's opportunities to work on other areas of the canal. And, as a friends group, we could look at an annual fundraising, sort of like a lot of different parks and other things in the past where the friends group says, we're going to raise X amount to put towards whatever, maintenance, enhancements, et cetera, that could come down the line.
What a great example of a public-private partnership. So just, wow, kudos to you. I know Commissioner Cluzie's been a big part of this for many years. So just, wow, it's very impressive. Thanks.
And I'm very fond of this project, which I think I've said from the beginning. But somebody help me with this. When I hear terms like construction application and permission letters with the Corps, it feels like we have launched very well past the concept phase. And I'm trying to fill in the blanks of your answer of, in an ideal world, 12 to 18 months. Where's the middle discussion? Am I interrupting something that'll get us to the middle discussion about what is the impact of this on the taxpayers and the real costs for maintenance and the impact on the residential areas, if any? Yeah, just help me with the design of how we're going to move forward in discussion.
I think we'll have a chart here that's going to explain a little bit about how we move forward. But as far as maintenance and the costs to the city, as Mark mentioned, we plan to have a friends group who is going to contribute that. And in fact, the funding for this project includes 2 years of maintenance to start. But that particularly is in regard to the plantings, because you want to ensure that the plantings will be good and last. So we need to have that maintenance. So the maintenance is maybe the plants and also power washing occasionally, parts of the dock. But that's, am I right, Matt? There's not anything else really other than that. So it's not a high maintenance project.
Well, and I'm not going to debate the point.
Sure.
When I say maintenance and additional costs, I want to hear at some point from the Director of Public Works, and I would think everybody does, but if I'm the only one, somebody tell me. I would want to hear from the Director of Public Works, from the police chief, from any other leads in our city that may have responsibilities that are going to get connected to this project. Because if we don't have that conversation and then we run into unintended consequences, there would be, I would think, very quick criticism.
Yeah, and I think the city manager Kevin's been involved in a lot of these conversations, and city manager has been working with the staff to have them know. I mean, and she'll get more specific when it's time. I mean, we're still not quite there yet. I mean, we have construction documents. We haven't started construction, but we're about at that jumping off point. When you say,
and also to hit on what you're saying is, yes, this is a new kind of a project because it's a waterfront project. But if you really think about this, this is a continuation of the public park that's already there. whether it's the Grove Park or behind the museum or the parking lot there, so that although it's different because it's waterfront and it's a ramp down to water and some different uses, I think it comes in and around the same that we do for the whole park. There's always going to be maintenance of cutting the trees or, mowing the grass or checking the irrigation and whatnot and replacing plants. But I don't know that there's going to be a substantial difference in police activity or any other maintenance activity from the public works than's already there. I mean, it'll be some, no question, but
Well, and
whether it's trash pickup or
yeah, and my only line of questioning is that if we don't have those public conversations, we will be very quickly criticized that we're not having public conversations. Because I'm not going to debate the merit of the project because of what I've already said previously. It's just that when I hear things like, trimming of trees or whatever the impact might be, we're already criticized for possibly needing to do some things along that line better in other areas of the city. So I think we have to balance, this would be taking on new responsibilities, and I just believe our house better be in order of the things that we've already got on our plate. So once again, we are not criticized that we're taking on additional things with the same resources that we currently have, and how are we going to actually juggle doing them all well to the satisfaction of our residents? That's the only thing that I think we should have a very upfront conversation about those kind of issues.
I'm not disagreeing, but I really just want to understand personally a little bit, not just from you, but from anybody that wants to comment. I know I've been coming to these meetings way before I was a commissioner, like 10 years, coming to different discussions, public discussions about this really, and it's been the same plan, I think, generally. And we've had it on the agenda for these meetings, boy, I bet 4 or 5 times, maybe more, since I've been a commissioner. So I'm just curious kind of what kind of, do you think a public hearing or like just a specific, I'm just curious what other type of, kind of discussion, just more discussion here in our meetings on the agenda every month, or I'm just curious kind of what else we should be doing. Because I agree, want to be as public as possible and get these things answered. I'm just curious what kind of things we could do better.
Well, I absolutely want to hear from Kevin Williams.
Okay.
I absolutely want to hear from the chief of police. Whether they've got any positive comments, that's always great. If they've got negative comments, that's what we need to hear. Because I'm not up for any additional projects in the city of Rehoboth Beach that start with the comment, why didn't you think of that?
I see. That makes sense to me. That's a really good point. And the police and the fire chief. I mean, all of the.
To me, it's
I
all
understand.
encompassing. This is not.
Yeah.
And honestly, if this goes really well, other opportunities can use this as an example. If it doesn't go well, then
Other
the
opportunities
opposite,
will use
the
this as an
opposite is
example.
true. So
That's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that. That's really helpful, and I agree actually with that. So be good to hear from Kevin and others.
and I didn't mean to leave out the city manager. I always want to hear from her.
Oh, definitely.
anything else? You have anything else, ma'am?
Well, I'm going to continue, but just to be assured, the idea of this meeting today is a public workshop to update the commissioners and anybody else who's interested on where we are. And at this point, we're like at 50% documents, and we have other meetings scheduled throughout the process with the commissioners, the public, or if you want to have a workshop, we'll do that. Whatever you need, we'll do it. I've been committed to this for 10 years, and I want to see it done before I retire.
Well, and if I might interject, Matt, I think that would be a good use of your time and the committee's time to actually get on the agenda for one specific town hall or public meeting to engage the community. And those folks, Commissioner Sharp recommended staff, and get the Director of Public Works and the police chief, the fire department, everyone involved in that. I know we speak of the project in-house, if you will, with the staff, but would be a good idea to get that out in public sometime. Purpose of today was to obviously give the mayor and commissioners an outline of where you are and what you've been doing and how we've been working. I did mention to the commissioners that we're hopefully engaged in a agreement with a local company, Envirotech, who cleaned the area up several years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, to do that work again, using the funds from the current grant that we have in process. So that needs to be done, according to Matt, prior to him bidding the project and having folks come out and look at it. So I know that's been also on the table. Commissioner Mills has mentioned that, and cleaning up the property. And regardless, hopefully the project will go forward, but to continue that and maintain that in future years, so not allow it to grow back year after year and have to do it again. So that project is underway as a sidebar to this.
And just something that we mentioned in our meeting, just be prepared. Some people will think that you're cutting down, Mother Nature and beautiful trees. They are not beautiful trees. They're invasive species, and they should have never been allowed to get to that point. And it's also detrimental to the erosion control that's there now, and really needs to be done according to the Army Corps lease. But I'm just saying from past experience, and maybe I shouldn't go here, but like the Milford Library, we had a little project that we did 20 years ago. There were 2 sickly Kwanzan cherries that were in the parking lot. We took out 5 acres of impervious area and added 3 acres of open green space with a community square that's now where the farmer's market is, and they have all kinds of festivals. They have an amphitheater and everything. Before it was the Zoo Bar, which was a rowdy bar and a parking lot. But the one picture that went in the paper was when these 2 sickly Kwanzan cherries got cut down. And we actually, part of the master plan, we planted about 50 new trees that are there now, all native trees, beautiful oaks. You can go down there and look at them. And it's 50% more green than it was then, less stormwater. It's attractive, people use it, and blah, blah, blah. But
well, that's very true. And anytime you clean up an area, I know that the police department in particular has had issues at this site with loitering, folks staying overnight there. So anytime you clean up an area, it'll just be more visible. There'll be lighting, but certainly we'll have issues with, or not issues necessarily, but additional tasks for, city staff. There'll be trash pickup, there'll be, maintenance included in that on an annual basis. City arborist has been involved with, discussions in this, and actually the city arborist worked for Envirotech at the time the last cleanup was done, so she can tell you the invasive species, and this isn't, to your point, Matt, we're not cutting down live native trees of any kind, so I know Liz Lingo spent a lot of time working on that, and as in her previous life as an Envirotech employee, and it was difficult.
And just a curiosity, since you used the term erosion control, going forward, the responsibility for that would fall on the city?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
And actually, that's a part of the original lease agreement that was it the Rehoboth Historical Society, as a sublease to the city, was to control the erosion on that section. It's about it's 4/10 of an acre where the lease area, and this project will take about 10,000 square feet of that. Let's see what that'd be, 4/10 of an acre, about little less than 20,000 square feet. So this project will take about half of the lease area. And just another sidebar, the reason we start doing the permits, and they're called construction permits, that doesn't mean we're trying to not include anybody in the process. It's just that they take 6 months to a year to get done. And if you don't start them when the design development project is underway and you have enough information about grades and so forth, if you wait until all that's done,
Sure.
It'll be another 6 months or a year out. And so it was decided that would be part of what was done initially. This is the updated cost as of last week. It hasn't varied too much from what it was when we came last July. The total is around $826,000. And we always put a clarification in that because there are things that need to be decided in terms of materials. We look at certain types of materials, but the city and the staff and whoever else will have input. I mean, you could decide that you want the deluxe version and the price might go up. Or you could decide you want to do something a little different and the price could go down or whatever. But unfortunately, they usually don't go down. And the, let's see, what else? But anyway, and these are not just prices that we, estimated. They're based on bids that we had in January for a Town of Slaughter Beach project, which involved the same types of things, boardwalks and pilings and fences and rails and working in the wetlands and, all this kind of thing. Plus, we updated some prices with a few contractors, not officially, but just to make sure we're doing our due diligence in terms of the masonry construction and some of the marine construction because they're primary parts. Now, those aren't official bids, and it'll depend, everybody has to bid on it when it comes out because of the state funding. We have to follow the state procurement regulations, and we'll be required to have a public bid, and we'll be required to use state wage rates because of the state funding, and the Department of Labor will determine what wage rate will be applied to this project. And part of our work as we continue will be to notify the Department of Labor and show them the plans and this cost estimate, and they'll determine that. But generally, since it's funded with transportation enhancement projects and the Department of Natural Resources, it usually becomes a highway project because that's how the greenways and TAP are. Even though they only have three core categories: heavy, highway, and building. It's not building, it's not heavy, so it becomes highway. And that's the Department of Labor and the legislature decided that. To me, they ought to have a greenway project, but I don't want to fight that battle. And this is an updated schedule. As Mark was saying, this is the ideal world version, but it's realistic. At this point, it is realistic. Fundraising is ongoing, as Mark summarize where they are and the city is with all these combined projects, the partnership of LRCIA and the city of Rehoboth Beach and the public that's contributed and so forth. But some of those grants will be coming in later in the year, as Mark outlined, Longwood Foundation and I don't know who else, but he knows all that. And we're in the construction documentation phase, but we're not ready to go to bid. We're at a 50% submittal, and that's one reason we're here today, is to get input, and we'll have another workshop. And we had a meeting last week with the city staff, the city manager, the mayor, Kevin Wilson, Director of Public Works, and Commissioner Calusi, and so forth. So those documents have been given to them for more scrutiny and review. They found some typos in our work, and I can't believe that, but it does happen. Hopefully there's nothing else major. So according to our schedule, due to the fact that we already have the permits, yeah, we're ready to go full throttle whenever anybody else is comfortable. But that doesn't mean we're going to until we're told to. Realistically, after today's meeting or next month's meeting or whatever you say you want us to do, and we will, we have 2 consultants involved, a structural consultant and an electrical consultant to do their part of the work. And we wanted to get to this phase before they're part of our contract, have them start working, and they will start working. But that still doesn't mean that you're not going to have however many meetings or inputs or hearings or reviews or whatever you need to feel comfortable. So, I mean, in an ideal world, construction documents could take another 2 to 3 months. Bidding and advertising, because of what I just mentioned, the Public Procurement Act and the fact that we're using quite a bit of state funding, requires a full month of bidding, a pre-bid meeting, and then you have to have the contractors have at least 2 weeks after that, and possibly more, to do the bids. And then there would be a time frame when the bids were due. They'd be open for 90 days as general process, and then the bids would come back. Well, they'll be to the city. The city will advertise, and we'll assist with that. And then the city or our committee or whoever will review those, and probably usually on our projects we're involved, we review that to see if they're balanced or unbalanced. And if there's a question, then you find out about that. And then usually, unless there's something really an aberration, because of the public bid process, it will go to the lowest bidder. And then after that, they will have to, we'll prepare a standard AIA owner-contractor agreement, and they will be required, because it's a state project, to have $3 million of general liability insurance, several $1 million worth of equipment and vehicle insurance, and they have to have errors and emissions insurance, just like my company does when we do state and municipal work. And then the agreement would be signed after it's approved by the commissioners and the mayor, and then construction would usually start and possibly a month after that. And then during that period, between when it's approved by the city and the commissioners and the mayor, they would have to submit all their certificates of insurance and all those kind of things. And then they would start a product submission phase, where they would be submitting different products or whatever that are specified, to make sure that they are what was required before they start purchasing things or whatever. And then we think the construction process, the actual in-field construction, based on our experience on other types of these projects, and talking to contractors about this during the design phase, there would probably be 3 to 6 months. 3 would be somebody that really wants to do it, and they mobilize and get there, and the weather doesn't get in their way, and they get it done. And we were lucky in Slaughter Beach, the one project we did, we thought it would be a 3-month project, and they were under time restrictions due to the wildlife birding in the marsh, and they actually did it in less than 2 months, which was unheard of. But we were lucky. We had a lot of weather, good weather, even though we had wet weather, and they fully mobilized and had like 10 people on the job, and the biggest crane you ever saw, which wasn't needed, but that's another story, and all kinds of other machinery. They did a super job, and it's all done. So then in 6 months from that time, you could have a ribbon cutting or whatever you want. A lot of times with these public projects, they do that because you kind of celebrate with all your public and state funders and all that kind of things. Now, I'm not going to really get into a lot of detail on this because this is available in paper copies as well as electronically for anybody to review it at their leisure. It'll probably put you to sleep, so I'm not really going to get into it, but this just shows you we have 20 sheets of drawings at this point, and we're only at 50%. That's the cover sheet with general notes. This is a stormwater management general notes sheet. This is what's called a construction, stormwater management and sedimentation erosion control plan. These are the required details that you have to have on the plan to get a certification for sedimentation, erosion control, and stormwater management. There'll be a high strength silt fence at the bottom of the slope and coming up the sides, possibly, depending on how the final review goes. In the event that anything is eroded, we have a freak storm or whatever. But during the construction sequence, they should only be disturbing the area that they're working on at that time, so that there would be minimal chance of that happening. And we've also included a turbidity curtain actually in the canal at the toe of the slope as kind of a belt and suspenders approach in case there's a hurricane or something during the construction, that any sediment that would get past the silt fence would be trapped in the turbidity curtain and then would be disposed of according to state regulations, Department of Natural Resources, all that kind of thing. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But we're, I think, prepared if it does happen. And it may be during the final review that they'll decide we don't really need that because it is an expensive item, but it's in the budget at this point. This is a construction plan, that basically just ties all the other sheets into this plan. So if you look at the plan and you look at gangway sheet 14, you would look at the plan and then you turn to sheet 14 and you would see details, sections, elevations, and notes about the gangway. This is a basic stormwater collection plan. Even though all the water will run down the ramp because of the slope, we're going to catch it at certain places, so it doesn't all come rushing down at one time, and not that it caused any problem because nobody would probably be out there if it was raining like that. It's just better to collect it in a few places. And then it is outletted at the bottom of the slope, but all the water already goes there, so we're not creating any more. We're creating a little bit more because we're adding 2,500 square feet of impervious area. But the reason it's eligible for the standard permit application is because when you look at the pre and post development runoff coefficient, which is the amount of water that comes in a 10, 25-year storm, the increase in the coefficient is less than a number 1. So it's allowed. So it's insignificant runoff increase in short term. Summary, this is just a blow up of the ramp, and it shows these ramps. There's a 30-foot ramp, and then there's a level landing, then there's another 24-foot ramp, and then there's another level landing, which is actually a enlarged landing so people can look out over the canal at halfway, and there could be a bench there or whatever. Then there's another 24-foot ramp and a level landing, a 26-foot ramp, and then actually what's called a landing fishing pier, a crabbing pier, which is something the outdoor recreational people wanted, but it's also a nice feature. And then you have another 24-foot ramp, a landing, a 16-foot ramp, a landing, a 32-foot ramp, a landing, and a 24-foot ramp, and another landing. And then it goes down to the boardwalk.
What are the ramps made of?
They're made of precast concrete pavers.
So big pavers that'll go down.
Right. Similar to what is used on Rehoboth Avenue or around City Hall, or whatever size they decide to pick. They're colored pavers. They're precast, and they're actually,
What size?
they're 4 by 8 basically, size of a brick.
Oh, the whole, oh.
That's actually better for this type of construction, so you don't have to have a concrete pump to pump concrete, down. Well, they're actually used. We did a plaza at Legislative Hall 25 years ago that's used to deliver supplies and all the paperwork that our legislature puts out every year, and it's a fire lane. So, and Denrick brings their big every time they.
Is it on a hillside and a slope?
That doesn't matter. The method of construction is the same. They've been doing these for close to 50 years, and if it's constructed the way it's supposed to be constructed, it'll actually last longer than concrete. And if you ever do have anything you have to repair, it's easier to repair. You don't have to jackhammer the whole thing out like you do with concrete.
The bricks aren't set in concrete, they're just set in the ground or gravel.
There's a crusher run base that's 8 inches thick, and it's power compacted to 95% minimum compaction according to ASTM D 533, which is a state requirement. And then there's some sand, and then there's the bricks. The pavers have 8,000 pounds per square inch of compressive strength, so it's actually stronger than a concrete walk. A concrete walk's only 4,000 pounds of strength. So these are the segmental retaining walls, as you can see in this example. That's one's probably higher than our highest one. Our highest one is 7 feet, I believe, but most of them are between 3 and 4 feet, because as it goes down the hill, it steps down, like this one in the left-hand corner is shown. So that keeps the height of the walls from getting too high. Need a little drink here. I'm talking too much. And these are engineered, and we've used them on other projects, which you'll see in a minute. But we also have a specialist consultant that is helping us with determining the geogrid, which helps tie this in, besides the weight of the structure and the blocks and the way it's put together. There's also something called a geogrid that ties it into the embankment. This is one we did for Lighthouse Lakes down in, what they call it, Fenwick Island, but it's really Route 54, closer to Selbyville. And this wall is about 6 feet high. Now, you won't have the columns like this because this is decorative, and you probably won't have the lights because they were trying to use a arts and crafts style, and it's part of the entry feature. But it does have a surcharge on the back of the wall. So a berm was created, and this one will have a surcharge from the embankment. Oops. That's another view. Pretty nice, huh? And then we have 6 pages of details of the wall before our engineers even gotten involved. And the reason we do this is we take cross sections and elevations going down the embankment to see how high the walls are, where the tops and the bottoms of the walls are. And you'll see on the uphill side, you have a higher wall. On the downhill side, you have a lower wall. There'll be a rail on both sides for ADA. There'll also be a safety rail on the downhill side. Probably not required, but it's generally a good idea. You don't need one on the uphill side because people can't fall off uphill. I've never seen that happen, but who knows? So here are more elevations. Like I said, there's 5 pages of them. This is actually a picture of the Slaughter Beach Boardwalk and Overview project that was just completed in April. You can see the boardwalk. We're looking at this Trex material, which is a composite lumber. We found after working in a Milford Greenway for 25 years and doing about 2 miles of boardwalks there, it's probably a better idea to use these because they don't have to be replaced as often. They don't have to be power washed as often. And these are the thicker, almost 2-inch thickness. It's not the residential type. And then you'll see that rail is the type of rail we're talking about, where this boardwalk goes up to 6 feet to look at a bird watching area. That's another view. Here you can see this better on this overview section. See this aluminum rail? That's the type of safety rail that we're looking at this point, unless anybody else has a different idea, but that's what's in the budget. And we've used those in a lot of state projects, housing authority, state buildings like Legislative Hall, that one's a little more ornamental. Miss Pillion Greenway for 20 to 25 years. They're made of cast aluminum instead of wrought iron, and they have a special powder coating on them, and they hold up very well. And it's a structural grade. It's not like the cheap, well, the inexpensive kind that you might see at Home Depot or wherever. This is just a blow up of some of the landings for the boardwalk portion of the thing, and which is at the bottom of it, and a fishing pier. Some details showing how the rails connect, some details for pilings. We're still in discussion with, oh, where'd he go? Kevin left. I must have put him to sleep. Of what type of pilings we're going to use on the uphill part. We might use helical piles, which we've used in Milford because they're, you don't need a pile driver. I mean, they have a driver, but it doesn't require a crane, and it's less vibration, although we might have to let the contractor decide, or, whatever. But on the floating docks, we will use driven piles because that's the preferred type, because you have ice potential, freezing and thawing, and the other helical piles aren't used for that method. This just shows one small portion. This is just like one section of the dock that would be like there. It shows the 28-foot dock with a kayak canoe appendage on the end, and people come right up there. I had a picture, but I couldn't find it. But anyway, people come right up there, and these little brackets let people that are disabled to pull themselves up and actually get out. This is a gangway that allows the dock floats on these clamps up and down during high tide and low tide, and the gangway goes up and down on the hinge to let people access the docks. This is just aerial view of when it was done at the Cheney-Wilmot Greenway. This shows the longer dock and the longer gangway in the Mississippi River. Those are just a bunch of details of the rails and the fabrication of the docks. Another view of the dock. This is a view of a smaller dock, again showing the kayak accessibility launch for both mobile people and disabled people, and that shows a picture of the gangway and this hinge that goes up and down, and that's at the McCabe Preserve in Milton. And I'll go through these. The idea is to have some interpretive panels that would talk about the history of the canal, maybe the ecology of the canal. That's part of the educational component. I got this from the Rehoboth Museum and Historical Society. They're doing a new exhibit on the canal, and it talks all about the canal history and everything. So I think we can partner with them and use some of that, and that would be very interesting to people. I found it very interesting. Look at this, 1917. Isn't that cool? That little cabin cruiser boat going through the canal. And what an idealized picture someone made this from old postcard. It's beautiful though, isn't it? And then some more details. That's the interpretive panel. I always got to throw this big dinosaur in here because you get to see him when you go from Lewis down Rehoboth in the Great Marsh. I don't know what kind he is, but anyway, here's some plant materials. I know Commissioner Sharp's interested in this. Maybe a lot of people are. These are all native types things. Marsh hibiscus, winterberry holly, coastal panic grass, hypericum, inkberry holly, northern bayberry, salt meadow hay. Of course, the salt meadow hay will only grow between mean high and mean low. The other ones can grow in uplands or occasionally in inundated areas. They're all different kinds of native plants, but they're also, well, actually the fountain grass isn't native. We just put that in there because it's a pretty picture, but we're not even using that kind. Purple lovegrass and broom sedge and Shenandoah, they're all, the Shenandoah is improved variety of Panaceum, whatever it's called, variegata, and that's a native one. It's used a lot in natural habitat meadows, and so is purple lovegrass and broom sedge. Sweet bay magnolia grows naturally along riparian areas in Delaware. Has a nice June flower, and all these actually do provide a little bit of wildlife habitat, and they're good for pollinators. And that's just the preliminary plan, and I guess the arborist will look it over, and whoever else wants to. And this is even more boring. It's just a summary of the specifications. And this is a preliminary lighting plan, and that's the end. Yay!
Thank you, Matt. I mean, I know it was probably a lot more detailed than anyone was expecting, but some of these, the devil's in the details, right? So it's good for all the commissioners to really see all the work that's been done on this, and it's been a huge amount of work.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, Pat, because I think this level of detail would be very helpful at a town hall meeting. So, or maybe a little bit shorter version at a town hall meeting, because you don't want to lose folks. But I'm curious
Under an hour.
when I looked at the timeline, where could we insert, or where should we insert a town hall meeting? And then, Mayor, I guess I'll put you on the spot. I would suspect at some point there's a formal vote from the commission
A vote for,
to proceed with this project?
I think we already
I
did
think we
that.
already had that.
We did that last.
I thought that vote was in the context of the grants and so forth. It was not in the context, I didn't believe, of the bigger picture, which I was talking about earlier, which is impact on budget and so forth and so on. It's food for thought.
I mean, I think the impression I had was that we did have a vote and discussed it. It may have been,
I mean, the
6
move
months to a year
forward
ago.
was, I mean, it was a move forward as I remember. I mean, we can look at that again, but once you go after these grants with the state, I mean, you're making a commitment to move forward with the project.
Yes, and that's the catch-22.
Well, yes,
That-
but we've also said from the very beginning that the LRCIA was going to be doing all of the fundraising for this, and that we were not looking for the city to put in any money whatsoever.
My recollection reflects what Commissioner Sharp said, so.
My recollection supports what Commissioner Calusi and Mayor Coons said. I thought we were voting for the project, so when we voted
I mean,
before
there's-
overall, since we
there's,
supported the grants.
Voting for the grants to move forward, we were making a commitment to the state that we were going to move forward, and the LRCIA, I think, at that meeting, made a commitment to do the fundraising for this project. So
I think that was part of the grant, is the city had to commit to the project to get the grant.
right, they don't give you a
Had to sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, exactly.
right. You don't get grant money from any state entity without making a commitment that you're going to use the money for the project. I mean, do you have different experience with that?
I just recall a different meeting, but well, let me put it this way. If once the decision is made that we've already voted on this hook, line, and sinker, that we're all in, then what's the point of a town hall? I thought it was the other way around, that there would be a town hall to express, we've come this far, this is what we propose, give us some feedback, then we would fill in the blank, which I still believe is a blank, which is what I mentioned before, to address the costs, additional costs for things I've noted today, erosion control, if there are indeed additional costs, power washing, additional liability or insurance, I don't know, possible additional utilities, any other issues that our public could bring up for us. But if that's not the process, then it's not the process.
We've been discussing this, obviously, for a number of years, but just
Yes.
going back over the last year or so, I mean, I've heard from a substantial number of people in the community about this over the last 10 years. As we were coming back and moving towards the city giving the permission to go out and get the grants, I took that as the city is moving forward because the city has to sign on the dotted line for these grants. The city has to be the sponsor
Of course.
to get these grants. And I don't think it was ever a thought of, okay, let's get the grants and then let's make a decision whether we want to go or not. It was more of a go, let's go get the grants because we are on the path forward for this project.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry that you may have thought that otherwise, but I think we've been discussing this. We've had a number of different meetings. As far as a town hall, I think it's a town hall would be, or some kind of a situation for the public, even more so than a regular meeting, would be helpful because these are the type of things that you had questions about. But I think the public does too, because I don't think the public has gone down to the nitty-gritty of plans like this. They've seen photographs. It's been in the newspaper off and on for the last 5 or 6 years. More recently, when we started the discussion again and heated it up, I think there have been a couple of press releases about the grants that we've got.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the impression I have from speaking with people in the community is, when's it going to happen?
Right.
Not when's you going to make the decision to happen, is when is it going to be available for me to walk down the ramp?
Well, maybe you don't want me to interject, but if I could.
I don't, because I think this is a commissioner issue right here. And I thank you for all the input you've given us. And I don't really want to debate it one way or another. I'm just one vote, right or wrong. But I still would think that a town hall would be a very helpful, informative meeting for folks. And
But you're implying that at the end of the town hall meeting, we're going to take a vote of the public and say, what do you all think?
no,
But, I want them to think.
Sure.
I want them to have the information. But the impression I have, again, from speaking with people and whatever, this would be just an informative meeting like this was, because we haven't seen a lot of these specific drawings. or plants, or whatever, and that's what it would be. It would be more informative of, hey, we're on our way, look what's happening. That's the impression of a town hall for me.
That's right. That's what I would expect.
Well, and if we can fill in the blank, because I tell you the conversations I've been in, because I do believe this project may be very well received and hopefully highly utilized. But the question that still gets raised is, I hear you saying that there's not going to be a cost to me as a taxpayer, but I don't believe you. So I think it's incumbent on us just to be able to put the words around whether or not there will be additional costs that at some point could translate in additional funding from the city. That's all.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I look around town, and I look at the parks that we have around town and the facilities for the public. And the city does maintain them. Now, putting in a dock with a ramp the way it is, the impression I have is the maintenance is pretty limited to what we're doing now, and that's what I mentioned before, up at Grove Park or up at the top of the patio area behind the museum or in the Stokely Park or over by Lake Gerard. These are the type of things, whether it's cutting the grass or watering the grass or trimming the trees, that takes place throughout the city. And this, in my mind, is a public municipal dock, just like Grove Park is a public municipal park. And I don't know that I've ever heard of people saying, you know what, Grove Park, why do we keep taking care of it? It's because I look at it as more of an asset of the city. And I think this is a perfectly wonderful asset of the city, especially at the entrance of town. And I think that's why most people I've spoken to are thinking that this is a great thing. I don't look at this as 30 boats are going to tie themselves up here. I don't look at this as every time the pontoon boat comes by, he's going to drop off 150 people. I look at this as just something that used to be in that postcard, a public dock, that boats used to tie up to walk uptown, and the boats would leave and come back and get them. Whether it's kids with a fishing pole or someone in a kayak or someone in a canoe or someone dropping off somebody to go to Dogfish or someplace like that. That's what I see it. Much like the other public parks in town. Much like the pavilion we just put in over by Silver Lake. I mean, we got funds from that from the state, which is great. I think the city put in some, but we're going to have to take care of it.
Let's not forget the Italian garden.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, and
wanna
see,
forget
I
that.
completely agree, and I think those are all great examples, but at some point, it might translate into, if you give people 10 more projects to add to their list of maintenance, at some point, it might turn into an additional, full-time person in the employ of the city. That's all I'm saying, that I could never debate the fact that we shouldn't maintain something, but how we do it might mean some additional funding or an additional human.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we go through every day in this type of community, that there are so many people coming across the bridge and using our facilities. Who's to pay for that? Well, hopefully everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not just this group or not just that group, and that's why we're trying to spread these things around as much as possible and continue to have the economic engine that we have in tourism. Anything else?
No,
Anybody?
I've spoken mine.
Please.
I hate to take another 30 seconds, but Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. Did I understand that you've gotten extensions on Corps of Engineers leases in the name of the city of Rehoboth Beach? And they're in the possession of the city of Rehoboth Beach? Is that correct?
Well,
There's records out there that have been obtained in our name.
the one lease that he mentioned before is from the Corps of Engineers to the Historical Society, and that was one of the ones that was
I'm saying because, so it's to the Historical Society and not to the city of Rehoboth Beach.
And the city has a lease with the Historical Society for the property.
Between you, the solicitor, et cetera, I would think we would be sure to be protected that we had copies of all those leases.
Absolutely,
In possession so that we had continuity. Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
I think that brings up a question, should those leases really be in the name of the city? I don't know that there's a
Versus-
benefit versus in the name of the museum, Historical Society. I don't know that there's a benefit to.
I don't know if there's a benefit the other way around. I think it should be in the name of the city because it's a city property.
That's what I just said.
No, but are you implying it should be in the Historical Society or should be in the city?
The city. Right now, you indicated right now that the lease agreements are between the Army Corps and the Historical Society, correct, Matthew?
Correct, and that's the
And
way.
that's where I
That's the
think
way
we
it
ought to
was.
That's the way
investigate.
the original lease was.
But I don't know that we need to maintain it that way. I would
We can get that changed down the
question
road.
changing it over
Well,
to before construction starts.
Well, we just changed this over so that the process could move along because we saw the possibility it might get held up if it's not at X number of years. Now that we've extended that's a good point. We could turn that over. But I think we had to get something in writing that we had it for a long enough period of time to convince the state and the people where the grants were coming from. So I think that's something we can think about, sure. Anything else? If not, I'm going to move on to the next thing, should be pretty short, which is discussion of a possible amendments to
Thank you.
Section 92. Thank you very much, Matt. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt,
Section 9229 of the city code regarding head-in parking and Section 9269 city code regarding parking meter zones. And I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Miller has worked with Mr. Mandelis on this, and have Evan just give you a brief synopsis of the changes that are needed.
Sure. So as Sharon's mentioned, I've worked pretty closely with Glenn on these amendments, as well as June Embert, the parking supervisor. So following a commissioner meeting where it was ultimately decided that the city would switch over towards 12-hour enforcement zones and 3-hour enforcement zones, one of the first instincts we had was to go back and take a look at the code again to see how it read. So also, as you know, as a side note too, the city is starting to transition towards a license plate recognition solution. So that eventually would do away with space numbers, the costs associated with the thermoplastic for the space numbers, pay and display, everything would be plate-based. So with that being said, obviously, if you're having a license plate reading technology, you need a visible view of the license plate. So with that being said, the first change or the first amendment to the code, specifically Chapter 92, Section 29, would reinstate angle parking, that section. Originally, what was there was the requirement that any vehicle parked in an angled space must pull into the spot as opposed to backing in. Believe it or not, sometimes there's instances where people on Rehoboth Avenue do try and back into an angled space, which obviously creates a lot of concerns. So aside from the safety, also with the transition towards this license plate recognition solution, we need to reinstate head-in parking for the angled spaces. That way, our cameras on the parking enforcement vehicle has a clear view of the license plates and can pick up those plates. Additionally, we do add an exception for handicap accessible vehicles. So if there's an instance in which a handicap vehicle needs to back in order for wheelchair access or whatever that might be, there is an exception in there for them. So that's the first revision to 92, specifically 29, is just to reinstate head-in parking. We did go back and try to do some research to see what language was originally in the code that was repealed. Sort of the brief search that I had done in assistance with Ann and Glenn, we were able to find some language which we've used in these amendments. But overall, that's the first change, and I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
Well, frankly, this gives me a little heartburn. I see the need for it with the license plate readers. I go way back, and I can remember for years and years watching people come back to their cars when they've backed in and getting tickets. And then I think it was on my watch with Paul and Pat possibly and others that we removed that section of the code. So that's fairly recent. A reason why it gives me heartburn is because, well, out of necessity, we need to put signs back up that are all taken down, I guess. There will never be enough signs, and that's just a fact of life, that there can't be enough. Because I know over the years, over and over and over, people were getting tickets and referring and pointing to where's the sign? Well, the sign's behind that bush, or it's 3/4 of a block down the street, and they just don't see it. I recognize that if we do this, we need an outstanding public outreach program to inform people. I would personally press for lenience for at least the first year on this. In other words, if somebody backs in and pays the meter and we come along and violate them, I think that's wrong. I think that's sending the wrong message. I'm willing to even give them, other than the first year lenience, just a note in the future, give them a $5 ticket or something. Because that's all it takes us to get out of our car and walk up and see if the car is parked legally or has fed the meter or not. I just don't want to penalize people that now, after 6 years or so of being able to back in, now are told they can't and may or may not see the new sign. So I've touched on public outreach and signage, public outreach beyond the signage in the papers, lenience, maybe a smaller fine, that kind of thing. I do have a comment on some of the parking meter zones, and I can hold that for a minute if you like.
I just want to agree with Commissioner Mills. That was my comments as well. Is at a minimum, I think this year's just, I wouldn't even say an official warning, but just a notification of the new change, and then maybe a year from now or something that we start to enforce it, but again, at a minimal cost, at least at the beginning.
Yeah, no,
Totally
absolutely.
agree.
And there's certainly going to be a bit of a learning curve. I know coming from the University of Delaware, one of the things that they had done in their parking lots was just issue, it looks like a citation, but the fine amount's just $0. It just gives them a notification. I think for this first year, there can certainly be some leniency. Maybe the thing that we consider is just a card that we have available for all the enforcement officers that they could just stick on the windshield or whatever that might be to notify them. But certainly going to be sort of a learning curve for the first year to get everybody to head in park. Also, in addition to the comment about signage, I know Bill Maffei has been working on 3-hour zone and 12-hour zone parking signage just to notify people of this is a maximum of 3 hours or this is a maximum of 12 hours. And on that signage, it does include a note that head-in parking is required.
And to go along with these things, we can probably, I would imagine June has statistics on how many tickets have been given in the last year. And I don't think it's many, but I don't know the exact number. So we'd be able to see if this is something that a lot of people have been doing. But more importantly,
Tickets for what, Mayor?
backing in.
But it's allowed.
Oh, I see. Okay, so let's throw that away. Okay. More importantly, safety.
Yeah.
Driving on Rehoboth Avenue, if anybody is parked rear end on Rehoboth Avenue in these angled parking, I think it's terrible for safety. I mean, I think, maybe we can put the cards, as Evan says, but I think this is a safety issue, and why it was ever taken out before is, I'm not 100% sure. But I think especially on these angled-in parking, I think from a safety perspective, it just does not make sense in the middle of the summer when Rehoboth Avenue is at its most busy.
And June had actually compiled a couple other reasons why in the past it might have been that head-in parking was required. So one of the reasons was exhaust fumes, so people backing in, then they idle their car and all the exhaust goes onto the sidewalk for people walking past. The other was to try and prevent accidental damage to meters. So somebody backing in might not have great visibility, especially before backup cameras, might damage the meter, whereas if you're head-in parking, you have better visibility. So those were just two other points that she had mentioned.
Anything else on the head-in? If not, Commissioner Mills, you've got some issues on the zones?
Well, not issues, just, I would just appreciate going through them with a fine-tooth comb again. Obviously, I don't know that any of us up here know 100% where all the parking meter zones are. I walk Olive Avenue from the boardwalk to 3rd Street daily, so I'm attuned to that. So that's from the boardwalk on Olive all the way up to Bad Hair Day. If you look at your section, lines 114 to 117, the way I read it, you remember you've combined two sections, A and B. And so lines 114 to 117, you cover Olive from Boardwalk to 1st Street, and then 2nd Street to 3rd Street. But there are those meters, number 300 to 311, that are on Olive between 1st Street and 2nd Street, and you've deleted them. I think that's an error.
I think you're right.
So you could probably just say boardwalk to
Second.
3rd Street, both sides. Couldn't you?
You can, if you're going to assume, see, from 1st Street to 2nd Street on Olive, 2/3 of the street is permit parking. That last third is, there are meters, number 300 to 311. So
Gotta
while
stick that
you
back
could
in.
say from the boardwalk to 3rd, if there's a meter there,
Yeah.
No, I agree, and certainly I think those meter numbers need to go back in. One of the initial thoughts that we had was to get sort of references to certain meter numbers out of the code, because if the meter numbers change or we make changes in parking, to go back in and change the meter number would probably be cumbersome. But I think in instances where the meter number calls out a specific section that couldn't be, easily explained, I think it's definitely warranted. So.
I think Commissioner Mills had a good idea if the meter's present. I mean, why put the numbers in there if we don't need to, because then it does complicate matters. So City Solicitor, do you think that's a reasonable solution?
Yeah, I do. I mean, right. I think makes a simple option.
Okay.
So we'll go through and look for
Sure.
any other
Yeah.
occurrences of that.
And I guess I'll just back up too, and kind of briefly describe Chapter 92, Section 69. So originally, how our code reads right now is 9269, there's multiple sections. So you have A, B, C, D, and E. Sections A and B address 12-hour parking zones. And the issue with that is, although the zone is the same in that it's 12 hours maximum, by splitting it up into Section A and Section B, that then requires the parking department or the police department, whoever's enforcing the parking requirements, to first understand where the violation's occurring, and then ultimately decide whether they need to reference 69A or 69B. So the thought was to consolidate the two into one section. They're both 12-hour zones. The same thing with the 3-hour zones. Consolidate into one section so that it's better for them to enforce those 12 hours and 3-hour limits. So that was broadly the whole purpose of consolidating the two zones. Commissioner Mills, I will mention that I think we've done a good job of going through with a fine-tooth comb, certainly noting the meters there on Olive Avenue. I know I had gone through myself and almost mapped up the parking map for every single line item. And as sort of validation, I did it with the parking supervisor as well after I had done it. And we did notice some revisions that need to be made. If you want to do that today, I've brought a map. I'm happy to do that. So overall, it's consolidating A and B into A. So then removing B. Section C addresses 30-minute meters. We don't recommend any change for that at this point. And then D and E was 3-hour parking enforcement, which would just be consolidated into D.
Anything else? If there's nothing else, they'll take a look at this, Evan and Glenn will work on this and bring this back to the May 17th meeting for a vote with those changes. It's all right? Okay, thank you, Evan. Very helpful. The next and last thing on the agenda is discussion of potential ideas towards creating a pedestrian mall at the eastern end of Rehoboth Avenue. And at the eastern end, I refer on the agenda, it's really from the restrooms to the boardwalk on Rehoboth Avenue. Carol didn't have an opportunity to stay here long, but she did send something to us, it's in your packets, about the meeting that the Downtown Advisory Task Force had last week. I believe 2 commissioners and myself were there, and the city manager were there and listened to all of this. And just from my perspective, honestly, there were, as they mentioned in the meeting, there were more businesses around that circle area at that meeting that typically are at the Downtown Advisory Task Force meetings. And I think the meeting was much larger than they typically have as well. And from what I heard, and I'll open it up to the other commissioners that were there, there was one person that was pretty adamant about having it, and 99, they were pretty adamant about not having it. And Carol listed a number of different things, and actually listening to the people that spoke, it was very informative because there are a number of things that I didn't think about that affect the businesses, that they do see affect the businesses. And what it brought to my attention is, I think the city manager, myself, Chris Johnson, and Lieutenant Riddle will probably sit down further and talk about events at the bandstand and communication of timing and how much time they really need to block off that end, because any kind of disruption down there really disrupts a lot of the businesses, and not just the ones on that portion of the avenue, but back a little bit as well.
Excuse me, Mayor, just real quick, I think rather than just have 3 or 4 people sit down in a room, we should talk about this publicly, and there's a bandstand special events committee where it would be absolutely appropriate to have follow-up conversations to this end, and it would be very public and inclusive. So
Well-
I think it actually should be reviewed by that public committee.
No, what I'm talking about is the process and policy that we have in place now for bandstand events. And what I'm trying to figure out is working with them and trying to figure out.
They're all
if
members of that committee, so I'm not sure why I would create a whole new, separate, individual, one-off group to
Having been
have
there,
that.
if I could, Commissioner Schlosser, one of the issues, just so you understand, for example, when they had the litter-free DE at the bandstand with the governor, they closed the street off 2 days in advance. And it's really a communication with the police in terms of, what time they need to. Maybe you want your committee to do that, but I think we want to have a solution to that fairly quickly, because the businesses, boy, they were really up in arms about how they lose business. I mean, it's particularly the Go Fish lady. She was saying, that's it for me for the day. There was 2 days in advance that they had closed that portion, and I certainly wasn't aware, but I wouldn't necessarily be aware of this. It's sort of what you would call in some ways police business, but should be handled by the city manager to make sure that these businesses are able to function the way they need to. But, I mean, if you want your committee to take this on, I'm not opposed to that. I just think it has to happen rather quickly. So given that the season's upon us and we don't want to wait too long and have this continue, I think it's almost just kind of a administrative detail in my mind, but I could be wrong.
I guess I'm okay with, and Mayor, this is nothing to do with you, just process. I guess I'm, to that point, I'm fine if just the city manager decides what to do and comes back to us and said, this is what we're gonna do, rather than having kind of a separate meeting and one off with chamber and the mayor and all that. And if it's administrative, that's great. Let's let then just the city manager come up with the solution with the police department, come back to us and say, this is what we decided. Just so it's more of a kind of a public, transparent kind of thing, and it's the city manager doing just her job as the administrator of the city. So I'm okay, I'd be okay with that, given the further discussion and description. I just don't see the point of having separate meetings in the mayor and some
I don't know.
commissioners and not
Is that,
all.
Mayor,
I
is
don't
that
know.
what you considered, what you were going to have a meeting? I thought that just she was going to get together with the police chief or Lieutenant
I mean,
Riddle
that's fine.
and
Obviously-
communications person.
Yeah, that's fine.
Obviously, because the city
Sure.
manager was there, and we do have this list of things. And with Chris and the police, that's fine. You don't want me there, that's good too.
Well, it's not wanting you there, it's just process. The city manager, probably with the police department and communications, would come up with some great ideas and a recommendation to the full body. And I think that would be an efficient use of everybody's time and get the right input.
Well, I was at that meeting, and they put a lot of effort into conducting that meeting and writing this. I'd like to just read the topics on it. The main topic was pedestrianizing the end of Rehoboth Avenue, the bandstand area, which means closing it off to vehicular traffic. Total attendees were 30. Majority in opposition to pedestrianizing, 1 in support. So when it says majority were in opposition, that's 29, and 1 was in support. And interestingly, the 1 in support kept being referred to by the others in attendance as you're not part of our circle, and he's not. He's a retailer or up much further. So the majority were all absolutely at the end of the circle. And some of their reasons for expressed opposition were loss of customers and revenue for businesses. Deliveries would become a logistical nightmare. Safety and cleanliness would be an issue. Puts businesses around the bandstand at an unfair disadvantage. Parking is already a problem, even more spaces would be taken away, and other, et cetera. Reason for support would be the aesthetic appeal, and that must have come from the one gentleman that kept trying to make his point. And for each topic I read, there's a breakdown here. We got this, I think, too late to embed in the agenda, so hopefully that can be embedded in the agenda. I kind of cringe sometimes when I hear this come up every X number of years, because I frequent a lot of those businesses down there, and I've talked with them over the years, and they hate when that end of the bands, that end is blocked off to vehicular traffic. And I think for me, attending this meeting, it just reinforced what I've heard from them year after year after year. Louis been there 60 years, so he's got a good history down there. Go Fish, Allison said she's been there 17 years, and others likewise. So they've got a history, visual history of watching the area being shut off and how it impacts their businesses negatively.
There's one exception, though, isn't there? As far as when we have music, they seem to really like that. It seems to work when it's closed off. Did you get that?
I did not get that.
You did not?
No,
Okay.
no. But again, what the mayor alluded to is, and Pat also, is that some of the businesses say, at least tell us, if you're going to keep doing it, at least tell us when you're going to block it off because of bandstand events, and then do it at the last minute if you can, not 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours ahead of time. So, my position on this would be to not close it off, but instead try to work out a program to better notify the businesses when there are going to be events there, when it's going to be closed off, so that they can, as they said, so they can notify their delivery people that they might need to come earlier than later. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, please.
I think it's this afternoon. I forgot to say good morning, but I'm Steve Spence. I'm here for one of the 99 percenters. I represent the owners of 1 and 5 Rehoboth Avenue. Dolly's Realty is the landlord. Tom Eibach, of course, owns Dolly's, the candy store. But my client, Signe Murray, who is the child of it's a long history, but the family's owned that site since the 40s. Signe Murray is the sole surviving daughter of the 3 sisters who inherited the property from the original property owners, the parents. Tom is her cousin, if you will. He's one of the sons of one of the 3 sisters that owned it for many years. She is a simple person, takes the view that that would be silly for lots of reasons. I only point out that parking has consumed a substantial amount of your time for months now on virtually every concept, whether it ranges from the parking garage here, the clear space issues, you name it, the parking committee, everything you've been, not everything, but a significant portion of what you've been doing over the last years dealing with parking. And right off the bat, you would lose 35 parking spaces, including 2 handicap spaces, right off the bat if you did that. You'd lose 2 drop-off spots. You'd lose the bus traffic that goes right to the boardwalk, which would be, I think, silly to make them go at the head of where the bathrooms are. You'd lose 2 loading zones. You would lose the ability to get handicapped persons closer to the boardwalk than you'd have to provide for some means of access and egress to get there that you have now, but you would lose. And there are 26, I counted this morning, I just drove around, there's 26 businesses on that circle, including Go Fish, starting as number 1, if you will, and you go around. And there's even a 27th if you want to go a little bit past. And I think that meeting was a good example of they would hate the idea. To the extent you're going to do it at all, and I've stood out there and sang carols when it's closed. I get it. I think it's a great event. I think just like it was mentioned in the meeting, if you're going to close it off ever for any special events, give the property owners and businesses, not just Signe, I'll use her as the example, give Tom notice that we're going to close the street at whatever time so we can have whatever the event is. And the more in advance you can tell them that, I'll give you one kind of not directly related example, but Dewey, if you want to have a special event anywhere in Dewey, you have to get a permit. Now that's the private owners, but if you're going to interrupt traffic in any way in Dewey, you have to get public notice. There has to be a public meeting, a public vote. I'm not asking you to do any of those things. I'm just saying the more notice you can give to the business owners of what the city intends to do with respect to any kind of a special event, so they can plan for deliveries, for whether they want to close, whether they want to hire more people, not hire, but bring more staff on for the event. Any way that you can help them with understanding what's happening, and so they don't have to learn it in the press, so they don't have to go chasing it, with all due respect, chasing agendas. Having the city manager just give them some sort of formal notice. Hey, we're going to have a band there this weekend, and we're going to close it down from 6 to 8, or whatever it might be. That is not, and without getting into all the legal analysis, I think that's a partial taking in a way. If you're going to deny street or vehicular access to a business, I think there's some risk there you don't want to fool with. So I'm a big part of the no group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spence. Yeah, part of the discussion also was, what if the city closed it off for pedestrians only, but set time restrictions for deliveries? And they all said that won't work because something's going to happen, the truck's going to be delayed, and then they're not going to get in, and then what are they going to do? I mean, there was a fairly lengthy discussion of that. And the other thing, I guess, I'm not sure it was said there or it's ingrained in my mind, is that, to be selective and just let delivery trucks only go in there, to me, defeats the whole purpose, and I don't know what the purpose of this is, if it's just a pedestrian mall or if the intent is to populate it with dining tables, 100% of it, then again, if you do such a thing, you can't let any trucks in there. Again, I'm not in favor of it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, logistically, it just doesn't seem to work at this time. Maybe 10 years from now, I don't know. It would be nice. I think everybody likes the idea. In fact, a lot of the people who were against it said, it would be nice, but, and these were all the reasons, and they're valid.
Yeah, and I think our community is a little bit different than other communities. Each community is different in that it just, there's so much traffic there, and it comes to a dead end. And I think it wouldn't work in this community. And actually, someone brought in some statistics saying that nationwide, pedestrian malls of this like, 85% of them have failed over 10 to 15 years. And I mentioned, I think locally, there was this whole concept in Salisbury 10 to 15 years ago, and they took a lot of time and money and created a downtown mall, and I think about a year and a half later, they closed it because they just didn't have the success that they had expected. So,
That started and failed in the city of Wilmington some years ago.
thank you.
Yeah, also, if you recall, the Street and Transportation Committee brought forth a recommendation to make 2 pedestrian malls along First Street between Baltimore and Rehoboth and Wilmington. And while we haven't discussed that yet, I don't even know if we want to, but I tell you, I can interpolate from what was said at this meeting what the feeling would be about getting all those surrounding business owners in to talk about closing off in front of their store, so.
Yeah, and actually, this, most recently, this discussion of this subject came up, I believe, at a street and transportation meeting, and I think it got a little bit of notification in the Cape Gazette, and I think that's why the chamber jumped right out and had this meeting, just because they were worried that this was something that was going to be put in front of the commissioners and for discussion. If no other questions on that, thank you. Move into commissioner comments. Any?
I've got 2. One is that the next Beach Walk meeting is scheduled. It's a special meeting scheduled for 1:30 on Friday, May 17th, before the regular meeting, and we just continue with our discussions. The other thing is, I noticed that the administrative variance is taken off the agenda, and I hope that comes back soon. I was very excited to see that on there. Having been to Board of Adjustment meetings for 20 years, I see that there can be a need for it if it's done right, and I would like to see it back in front of us as soon as whatever.
Any other?
I have several comments.
Sure.
And I'll try to do these really quickly. Well, I was going to start out by thanking a lot of people for the Steve Elkins Way dedication the other day. And so I just echo everything that we said earlier this morning. Please go over there and enjoy that area. I had the opportunity yesterday on a different topic to sit through the, I guess it's the newly revised Cottage in Town Awards put on by Main Street at one of our local restaurants. And it was really an honor to see the Main Street folks and some business people and some residents being awarded for honoring historical preservation in our town and also for adding to the beauty of our town. Some gardens were awarded, and some buildings and some renovation projects, and I think that's something that we really want to be behind and support. I want to bring up in the near future, and I guess it'll take a discussion with Glenn, to designate the city park area along Canal Street from Rehoboth Avenue down to where the townhouses are as a no smoking zone, to be consistent with what we've done with all of the other city parks. I talked with Commissioner Mills about this a few years ago, actually. And Stan, if I remember your comments, I think you had indicated to me that it was just forgotten about in that original legislation when city parks were designated as no smoking areas. That section was just forgotten about, but it is dealt with as a city park, even though the city owns a portion of it, and as we've talked about the Canal, the Corps of Engineers that technically has a portion of it, but we have a picnic table or two. We have 5 or 6 of our white benches along there. People do utilize it. Cigarette butts are frequently left on the ground, and every time there's wind or rain, they either, depending on the direction of the wind and rain, they wash into the canal. That's not good. Or they go into the street and wash into our drains and with the stormwater. And so I think I'd like us to consider having that consistent
Do
with
the
the other
Lovitz
city
own
parks.
part of that property?
What's that? No.
Lovitz, no, okay.
I would suggest you work with Commissioner Mills on whatever it took to get the zones on the previous parks, and then maybe put something together with Glenn as far as an amendment to the zone, to the code for the, discussion in the June workshop, and then maybe we take it to a vote, if that works.
That'd be fine.
I'm sure it's pretty simple, but I think we should discuss it openly, put it on the agenda in
Is there
June.
consensus here that
Oh,
that
yeah.
it's something we should
Well,
move toward?
I would say that consensus should be to put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
And then we talk when it's an agenda topic on supporting. it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Glenn can just draw something up using what he's already got on paper. Yep.
Okay. Couple of other real quick things. I've talked with Kevin a couple of times about the crosswalk area on State Road and Hickman. That's my immediate neighborhood where I live, and we have at least a couple of neighbors there who are disabled, a couple who are in wheelchairs. State Road, as we all know, is a very busy road. And that intersection of where Canal hits State Road and then goes into Hickman and vice versa is also a designated bike route to the beach. And yet, in that intersection on State Road, there's no designation that it's a crosswalk.
And Commissioner Mills probably knows more about this. It's because we don't have any curbs on the
Right.
north side of State.
Right.
And so it has to do with ADA. You have to have
Right.
a ramp on both
So-
sides or something.
Correct, and I've had conversations with Kevin, and I'm just bringing it up so that you all know, and any public that are interested know that Kevin's going to take a look at what the options could be. There are curbs on the Hickman side, and even if you go down a block, there's curbs, on the east side of State Road, but none on the west side. And so he's going to take a look at if there is an opportunity to do that, that there may be some ADA funds for that then would enable a crosswalk that could slow down the traffic when there's bikes and pedestrians there. We have a huge number of bikes because we designate that as the bike to the beach area. We have a lot of pedestrians that walk down across the bridge, down Canal, and then across that intersection to follow Hickman to the beach, particularly during the season.
It's a good idea.
So it's an unsafe area right now, given the amount of bicycle and pedestrian. And then the last item, a different topic, is that several citizens contacted me a couple of months ago to ask if I would just sit with them and listen to some concerns and interests they had regarding environmental issues. So I did that last week. And they've gotten on to kind of a roll with some of this. And so I'm just bringing it to your attention at this point as an FYI that we do have a number of citizens that are very interested in issues that range from why do we not pick up recycling, collect recycling on the beach, on the boardwalk. One of them wrote an email to Commissioner Mills regarding his committee and have they considered that? And so that discussion will take place. Why do we not pick up, well, the question was, do we pick up recycling in the business blocks of our 3 business streets? There's mixed perception out there as to what happens to the piles of cardboard. Does it go into the garbage? Does it go into recycling? So they're raising those issues, raising issues around plastic bags, plastic straws, also about mass balloon, what do you call it? Mass balloon releases, thank you, on the beach and for other events when we know that it's environmentally really negative for these to all go into the ocean and the wildlife. So I just wanted you to know that there's a group thinking seriously about this. They're passionate. They're reasonable. They understand that we have to have reasonable discussions around all of this. And they want to meet again in June, and so I'm going to meet with them. And I've told them about our committee structure and that to get things done, I encourage them to come through our committee structure. That's why Commissioner Mills received the one email thus far. And so they're going to be raising some issues. I think these are intelligent, good issues for our city to be considering.
Thank you, Dick. As far as the crosswalk and the ADA areas there, you know, I'm not sure most people are aware that we have an ADA transition plan that surveyed all the crosswalks and intersections and prioritized them. So, you know, there may be that's a worthwhile project, but it may not rise to the top, for instance, you know, because obviously everything costs money. And
yes.
money's a great dictator there.
Well, hopefully Kevin will come across that data and that information and can help inform him as he takes a look at this.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Anybody
Thank you.
else? Comment? Any citizen comments? Please.
Good afternoon, Mark Betchcall, 98 Sussex Street. You probably all know that by now. I have a couple of questions. Why was clear space removed from the agenda today? Why was there no public notice of removal from the agenda? And was clear space given advance notice of the change of the agenda, because they were not here? So I surmise from their not being here that they were given advance notice and the public was not.
They asked last night to be taken off the agenda.
That would be a very good answer. Explains it very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. The first one is a safety problem. If you leave Rehoboth Avenue and go towards the Hennepin Hotel on First Street, you cross the bridge and make a right, and then up onto First Street from Lake Gerard. Your First Street's Pennsylvania Avenue, and everything past Pennsylvania Avenue on the right-hand side has hedges growing out into the street. I measured last year, some of them are from the edge of the roadway. The property lines are back as far as 14 foot. Typically, the bushes are growing out in such a manner that the people cannot park their vehicles so that the driver's side of their vehicle is off the roadway. Sometimes as much as 2 foot onto the roadway. It's been this way for years, nothing happens. It's time for the city to go down there, pass out a letter. I know it's midway, but it could have been done in October, and go through and clear those bushes back to the 12-foot line, not necessarily to the property line, but back to the 12-foot line. If somebody doesn't like it, tough, but it's dangerous. It lets people park off the roadway. The police don't have to go down there and ticket and make money. That lets the police be available for other items. If I could have the camera for a picture on the... my comment is about, that was in the paper. I'll turn the picture if that would help. This is Rehoboth Avenue in front of Carlton's. And last week, a friend of mine made mention that they were not going to be able to be here and told me about the new flower boxes. And I remember the nice comments, and I think it's a good idea where, I guess, between either Main Street or Rehoboth and Bloom, we got planter boxes downtown. On the 5th of April at the transportation meeting, there was brief conversation about downtown at the busy hours, weekends. The sidewalks are so congested that you can hardly get by. And realizing that this was done in a positive light, but if you can see where my pen is, those are flower boxes in front of Carlton's. I'm not picking on them, but that's the only place. Most of them were set, if you look on down the street to where the man is standing, the boxes were set parallel with businesses. All of them are I didn't walk, I don't know where they all are, so I shouldn't say all. But they're planted on the sidewalk. They're planted on the public space where most of the people walk in a straight line. Whereas if they had been put over in alignment with the park bench or the trash can that you can see in the picture, they would have been out of the way. You would have the best of both. But to have them on the sidewalk, okay, but not right in front of the windows, and definitely not the two of them perpendicular in front of Carlton's. Now, I made mention to the city manager's office. I know there's a lot going on, and I think it needs to be corrected. I asked Commissioner Mills what happens here. He said he asked the city manager. The city manager said, the mayor said it was okay. So I ask you, where's the liability? Whose insurance? If somebody gets hurt, I think everybody means well, but I think there's a better plan. And I don't think it should last beyond today. I gave it in on Friday afternoon. I could have gone down there and moved them. I guess you had other things going on, but it would really be helpful, and I still would like an answer. Who's responsible for them? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd just like to make a quick comment. Mayor, your response to Mark Bechtel that clear space has to have it removed, I guess I find it funny that clear space asked for it to be removed. That means they asked for it to be put on. This is not, I don't see this as their topic.
No, it was not their topic. Initially, it was a topic that I had put on just to kind of have a discussion amongst the commissioners, kind of using clear space as a subject, but also using the projects that are in front of us over the next, they're in front of the Building and Licensing Planning Commission. And, kind of the direction that we, the commissioners, want to see the city take as we move forward. So that's why I put that on there because of all of the discussion that's taking place on both sides. Some people want it, some people don't want it, some people want it one way and not the other way. Parking is going to be such a huge issue, so on and so forth. And that kind of all fell away last week when the Planning Commission had their meeting and kind of came up with some tweaks. The city solicitor kind of came up with a tweak, but we didn't take that any further, and we just kind of pushed it aside. And so, my original thought was to put them on here to discuss their project as a whole from a 30,000-foot level. However, they did call, and since that is their project, they asked for the subject to be off the agenda.
But as we move forward, I would still like on the agenda a conversation about the vision the commissioners have for the city, and what even more importantly is I think that we need to have some meetings with the Planning Commission to talk about that vision, because I don't want at the 12 months from now is to get their report or the comprehensive development plan draft specifically and find out there are things in there that, well, gee, why didn't they consider this? Gee, why didn't they consider that? It seems to me that the Board of Commissioners should be somewhat involved a little bit in this in terms of direction. I think we all have ideas about where the city should go or could go, and the Planning Commission, has their role, but I think we have a role too.
Isn't there another joint meeting planned?
There is. I don't know how quickly it is. Maybe,
I mean, I don't know. There is a joint meeting for the future. It's just it's taking some time to get up to speed. I think they're up to speed now. And the consulting engineers, KCI, Debbie File heading that up, is upticking her presence, if you will, at the Planning Commission. She was there last week. She intends to be there this week. So I think they're getting on schedule. I don't know when the meeting, though, is.
I mean, you know that I have a big interest in mixed use, and I have talked to the chair about it, and they said they'll certainly let me know when they're going to discuss it, but there's other things. I mean, there's other things about the look and the feel of the city. I mean, I've read through the 2010 zoning piece, and it talks about how on the avenue, we want to preserve historic, blah, blah, which is fine for historic buildings that exist, but our avenue is eclectic, and we need to talk about the charm of the town being somewhat, in my opinion, this is a discussion that I think we need to have with the planning commissioner, or at least I'm interested in doing that.
Well, and I would completely support that, because I don't know that I recall this group having had a substantive discussion about that. Because I wonder if each one of us were to state our vision for the residential areas or the commercial areas, we might not be intersected particularly well. So
With us or with the planning commission?
I think first with us.
And so, given that, I'm sorry to interrupt, should we just basically put this on the agenda for a discussion of the path forward for the city?
To me, that's important, because before we interact with the planning commission, it might be good to surface the areas that we really see our commonalities, and maybe surface some areas where we might be divergent in our views. So, doing that with the planning commission, to me, is maybe not the best use of time. But maybe if we had a better sense of where we are similar, and if there are any areas where we are not, that might be helpful.
So
We do some kind of exercise, I think the mayor set up 2 budgets ago.
Yeah, that was,
We introduced
yeah.
the budget session with what are our visions.
Yeah, we talked about that. What I'm thinking here is maybe, on Pat's suggestion, maybe each of us takes a look at the 2010 CDP and kind of come up with ideas on the path forward relative to the things that are mentioned, and maybe any kind of addition stuff, from a vision perspective. And so have a meeting, or have it on our agenda for maybe no more than a half an hour discussion to kind of pull that stuff out. And then maybe the next step would be something with the planning commission. Because I think it is an important thing that we come out with our visions, because their process is long and drawn out, and they're doing a lot of stuff, but I think it's very important for them to have our input. And if it's in a meeting, that's great, but I think if we could enumerate the things that we care about, just to make sure that they're listening and thinking about the same thing. And they may be thinking about the same things already. But I think if we all take a look at the 2010 CDP prior to the next meeting, and then just bring some bullet points from each perspective.
Mayor, we've done this twice now, right before the budget kickoff, and neither time it seems to go anywhere strategically. So I'm wondering, maybe there's a little more thinking that could be put into the agenda, and exactly what we're doing.
I think
it's twice. It's
incumbent upon each of us to read the CDP and utilize that as a foundation to talk about. I think a lot of our vision that we talked about prior to the budget was more,
Capital improvements, wasn't it?
well, it was capital improvement, but not so much. It was more flowery, if you will. I don't know the exact term I'm trying to find out.
It wasn't specific.
It wasn't specific.
Like that
where
CDP is. I see.
CDP is specific, and maybe we can hit on those.
Okay.
And then if there's something in the CDP that's not mentioned, but it's crucial, like mixed use, but I know mixed use is mentioned in the CDP. But for example, if mixed use wasn't mentioned in the CDP, maybe that's something that should be in the next CDP. So if there are things that we're thinking about for the future, I don't know, if there's anything missing from the CDP, because it's pretty, there's a lot. And I think if we can talk about those things and pinpoint the things that are doable and not doable, and some of them were 20 years ago. I think the development in town is a lot different today than it was 20 years ago. We've got 4 or 5 projects that are on the docket that, you know, I think 10 or 15 years ago, the Planning Commission would have said no. Let's not even talk about them. And now I think from an economic development perspective, they're very important. I think, you know, a lot of construction has taken place in the residential neighborhoods. And, you know, for the longest time, people have talked about, geez, it's terrible, we're losing the character of the town. I walk around town and I think these new houses, some of them are absolutely beautiful. And they look a lot better than the cottages that came down. So I think the point of view is a little bit different today than it was 20 years ago. And I think 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we were looking to the past to try to get back there. And I think we have to look at the future and how to get to the next step. And I'm not saying this is going to be Atlantic City. But, you know, we've got this 1 mile square and we're pretty well locked into it. So how do we make that a better 1 mile square? Because we'll never be able to go backwards.
I really agree, Paula. We need to have this conversation in a very deliberative way. You know, somehow we need to come up with, I think, kind of a joint vision fairly early on before the Planning Commission gets too far down the road and they do it, so that we can find where we can intersect with them in really productive ways. And 30 minutes isn't going to get us very far into something that's fairly significant kind of discussion. So there may have to be a number of 30-minute discussions,
Or we could have some kind of a special.
or we have a special
commissioner
meeting on it.
And plan on 2 hours, but
I
it's
think it's-
separate from the workshop or the
I
regular.
think it's really important.
I'm open to suggestion.
Yeah, I think we should.
I'd like to hear from. are you-
No, I agree with all of that, and I think there's been some really good points made. I would be in favor of having a focused meeting to talk about this. You know, I think we need to limit it to 2 hours.
Yeah. But I agree, half an hour, you're probably not gonna get as much as you want of a discussion. But, you know, maybe a 2-hour meeting, sometime between now and Memorial Day or June 15th or something.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm going to pull out all my notes and slideshows from the past many years.
Oh, then it'll be
They're
8 hours.
all the same.
Those would be for
As
your
long as you provide
reference, Stan.
popcorn.
I'll try to figure out some dates. Are there any dates anytime soon that don't work for people in the next 30 days?
Well,
Okay.
I mean, you want it, probably better to do that on an email than.
Oh, no, I'll do that in email. I'm just saying if somebody's going on vacation for 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks of May.
I'd just
we can't
urge
do
us,
that.
if we're going to spend the time in 2 hours, put some sort of framework about it, what we're trying to accomplish, you know, what the agenda is going to look like specifically, have somebody capture notes and come back to us with what we agreed to, or at least what we discussed, or it'll be the same as the 3 times we've done it
Well,
since I've
you
been on the
keep saying
commission.
about the 3 times. I was
Yeah.
not a part of those 3
I know.
times. So,
We'll
you know,
start.
there's some new people here, and we want to,
Yeah.
we
So
want
I'm
to.
saying do it differently, because these are the same thoughts and ideas we had twice already, 3 times. So,
Oh,
so let's do it a little differently.
I'll
so that-
volunteer to summarize everybody's comments.
That's great. Good. Okay. Super.
And we'll have minutes.
Yeah.
And it'll be public. But I think we have to kind of stay within that 2 hours. Okay, anything else? Just the future meeting dates, I'll determine something there. Just the next meeting we have is Friday, the 17th at 3 PM. I know Commissioner Mills mentioned another meeting at 1:30 that day. And I don't know of any other commissioner meetings until the June workshop, which I'll figure out later.
Yeah.
All right? If nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.